Hello.
No, then mate, all right.
Not too bad. How you doing? Sorry, I'm a bit late. I had to bribe my son into being quiet.
No, that's all right, mate. I was very late with the link, to be fair.
No,
How you getting on?
his mum was going to be in, and then she had to go to work, and so she's not back. So I was going to go down in the garden and be nice and quiet. So I've had to bribe him in the front room.
That's all good fun, isn't
Exactly. Yeah.
it?
You all right?
Whereabouts? Yeah, yeah, mate. Whereabouts are you again?
I'm in London in Ealing, Hanwell.
Okay, all right.
So,
You've been down there for most of your life, type thing.
yeah, yeah. I used to be slightly further in, but no. As you get older, you get slightly closer to the M25. I think if you live in London.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Well, so you're a QPR fan. What's going
Yes.
on there? What's going on
Yeah.
there at the minute?
Don't know. I mean, who the hell? I've got no idea. The manager is it? I mean, we've got one, but he's on gardening leave, so it's all a bit. Yeah, I don't. I really couldn't tell you. It was kind of a weird season because we sort of started it going like, oh, maybe this will be all right, and we won't, we won't be struggling, and we won't, and then we got ourselves into a relegation thing, and then we got out of it just at the end. We had two games where we didn't have anything to play for, which I think was the first time in 3 years that's happened, which is quite
Right.
nice actually to go to a game and go, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, similar. I loosely support Hull, and we had a bit of a mad time.
Yeah, Hull was a weird one because I mean at the start everyone was like, oh, they're going to do really well, and then they sort of struggled. The one thing I watched the game via, I think it was on Sky on the red button, but our away game, and that pitch looked absolutely awful.
Yeah, yeah. It was
So I
bad
can
this
see why
season, wasn't it?
Hull sort of do well away from home and perhaps struggled a bit because it's just like it must be so demoralising. It must really be heavy legs running around on that mud. It's really
Yeah, I think he managed to sort it out, but it's like the last home game or something.
right. Is it
But
because
yeah,
does someone else share the pitch, or is there a rugby
yeah,
team?
there's a rugby league team, Hull
Right,
FC
yeah.
share as well, but I don't know how much they damage it or not really. But
I don't know. I just think that's always everyone's like, it's fine. You can put two teams on it, but I'm never convinced that's quite. Particularly in this day and age, when it's played so fast and was passing it, you go and sort of look at it, it's like a carpet, and then you get to a ground. I went to Oxford away, and that was a bit like, what the hell's this?
yeah, theirs is a weird ground, and it's still got that big empty stand. Oh,
They've got the
empty
end missing, so basically it's
ends
three
missing. Yeah.
stands, and then the other end's the car park. And the best was because we beat them quite comfortably, but we only scored like the last goal that stopped it being, I think, just on the stroke of 10 minutes of extra time that the ref decided to play. And I've never seen so many people. You just watch them like this row of traffic from the stand. You can see them like the sort of the bypass are all getting to. It's so weird.
Yeah, for a bit of context and everything, mate, can you give us like an idea of how you ended up being a music journalist type thing? What was the route into it?
So my route into music journalism was basically when I went to uni, I was doing politics, which is a kind of waste of time. It's good fun, but there's no job at the end of it degree. Someone said to me, "What do you want to do when you leave?" And I thought, I might be a journalist, maybe I don't know. And they said, "Well, you better go do the student paper then. If you're going to be a journalist, you should do the student paper." So I went to the first meeting as a first year, and they said, "You can keep the records if you review them." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm doing this then." And so I ended up writing for my student paper in the UEA, Concrete it was called, and did the music section there. Left uni, did a degree with the tension of trying to be a more serious journalist, and then by complete luck, I ended up getting this trainee scheme that Select magazine had, which was kind of like the monthly, like when you had NME and Melody Maker at the end of the 90s. It was like this was 2000. It was like really, I loved that as a magazine. So my first job was like a Dream Mag, and then it folded after 3 months. But I was lucky because it was owned by the same people that own Q. I finished my training on there and then freelanced, and that's how I ended up then becoming a music journalist, sort of working for Q for about 4 years until I ended up at NME when they had a vacancy on the news desk.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you're in Norwich for uni then?
I was, yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
what year was that out of interest?
So I went in 96, and the reason that it was on my list of places to go was in the prospectus for 1996. There was a picture of Damon Albarn in the prospectus because the UEA is like the place where they had lots of gigs in that part of the world. You sort of had the waterfront, which was a small venue, and UEA itself was like bands on the up. So I was like, I might get to see bands if I go to this place. And yeah, so Suede played the first week, I think. So I definitely made the right choice. So.
Yeah, I think I went to see a band there about 20 years ago. Like at the uni, yeah. Quite a popular venue for like touring bands.
Yeah, the LCR. Common Room, but we all call it LCR. No, we got loads of great bands. We had Robbie Williams' first solo show. He did a little secret warm up thing, and he was in the room next to our newspaper office. And we were like, "All right, Robbie," and these bouncers like, "Go away, go away." So,
And it
yeah,
always seems like a great age to be like going to uni. Oh, sorry, a great year to be going to uni around that time when I don't know, Oasis is kicking off and everything. Were you into that type of music?
Yeah, I'm a huge Britpop fan. I mean, I had a stack of NMEs at university. I didn't throw them away, and they just slowly and slowly got close. Just keep under this table, and they got closer and closer to the top until the table was balancing on top of it. So yeah, no, it was kind of sort of. I was at sixth form of like for the kind of real height of Oasis and Blur and Pulp and that kind of stuff, which was amazing because I grew up near London, so we went to so many gigs, saw so many people playing like the Astoria and then Brixton and then Wembley Arena for some of those shows as people got bigger. So you sort of follow them up the venues. And then, yeah, going to Norwich as a student was amazing because it was sort of, I mean, I quite like, like I remember Geneva played loads. Do you remember Geneva? They had that really high falsetto vocal. I think they were from Scotland. And they
Okay.
played UEA loads for some reason in my first year. I absolutely thought they were amazing. I think they were on Nude, the same label as Suede. And they were just like, there was all sorts of bands like that. I remember Bernard Butler coming and playing one of his early solo shows there with that record he put out on Creation. Stay was it? Was the single, wasn't it? Yeah. And that was we were really spoilt for gigs. It was a good time for seeing bands and stuff. And it was a good time to be a student journalist because there was a whole infrastructure in the music industry. There were PRs whose sole job it was to deal with students. So you would get like, do you want to interview? And you could actually get access to people and interview sort of not some half decent people and sort of practice and learn what you were doing and write stuff up and then see people reading it around the campus in the rest of the week. So yeah, it definitely gave me a taste for kind of like this interviewing musicians and writing up is quite a fun thing.
Yeah, were things a bit more linear back then, type thing?
Yeah, I
Like
think so.
everyone
Yeah,
knew the
because there was no, I
structure.
mean, there was literally no internet. I remember the first time I used the internet was at university. I literally remember they said, "Oh, you can use the internet if you want." And I went on it, and the only address I could remember was NME.com because I'd seen it in the paper 100 times and obviously easy to remember. So typed in NME.com, went on it, took about 10 minutes to load up this horribly clunky front page and thing. And I looked at it, read a news story or whatever, switched it off, and I said to the lady who was running the like induction thing, "Do I owe you any money?" This is how early it was. She's like, "No, it's fine. It's not it's not on a phone line." You're like, what? How's that? And so yeah, it seems funny. Yeah, the very first website I saw, I ended up working on. So yeah,
That's mental,
couldn't
isn't
escape it.
it? And then, yeah, in terms of interviewing bands at that time, like I don't know really, what was your approach? We just really excited and kind of had a didn't wet nervous type thing.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, because we were students, because I was a politics student, so we had this sort of air of like we're redefining the world, and we're going to be like the next generation of all these big political correspondents, all that. Which one of my friends actually is. He ends up actually he has a proper lobby journalist. But so we were a little bit trying to be professional, but I hate to think what those interviews are actually like. I remember interviewing Travis, and like about four of us turned up to do the interview. We were like, oh, they were on that. I think it was U16 Girls had just come out, and they were very friendly to us and all this. But I always remember that because we had this really big chat about the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. And I hadn't read it, and I still don't have. And they were saying how important that was, and then there was a big thing about watching Paris, Texas. And then years later, I remember interviewing Fran Healy, and he was like, "Oh, I don't really read books," and I was like, "I think maybe I misremember that, but I'm sure you said." And he's like, "No, no, no." So,
Did you have a lot of situations like that where you'd meet people back down the line, kind of thing?
yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's a lot of bands I thought we'd meet who just there seemed to be a bit of a cut off. I think because I graduated in '99 and then didn't work properly until 2000, the end of 2000. And I think it was just that sea change where suddenly people didn't know what was happening in indie, particularly, Britpop had suddenly stopped. So there's bands like Symposium who we got to know and thought were amazing. I thought I'll see them down the line and never, until they reformed, never saw those guys again in those sort of situations. But it was more PRs actually. It's more sort of people I dealt with who would like do student journalism, and then like 5 years later, you'd be going, "Hang on a sec, you didn't work at Concrete, did you?" And you'd be like, "How do you know that?" I went, "Oh, because I was the regional rep for such and such label and that kind of thing." So
Yeah, yeah. And how did you get on with the politics degree?
I got 2-1. It was all right.
Well
Yeah,
played.
I did okay. Yeah, I managed to crowbar some history into it as well. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've ever used it. I can't think in any circumstance I've ever. But it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed. It was sort of arguing for a degree, so it was okay. I'm good at arguing.
And I mean, you've touched on it already, but what were your first steps after uni then? Was it, did you know, after that taste of music journalism, did you know that's what you wanted to do type thing?
Well, initially I kidded myself. I was like, I'm going to be a sort of serious journalist. Well,
Right,
not that
yeah, yeah.
music journalists aren't, but I mean, at the time, I was like, I'm not definitely going to be a music journalist. And also, loads of people say things to you like, don't write if you're going to be going into journalism, don't write about the thing you love because you'll end up hating it. And I did a magazine course at Cardiff Uni, which was a year of like, learning to write features and that kind of thing, which was really useful and really interesting. But at that, I was very much like, I'm not sure I want to be a music journalist. So I ended up working on this TV magazine that reviewed, like TV, actual TVs. God, was it called Home? So you literally go like, I didn't even have a TV because I was like just renting this flat in London, couldn't really afford it. And they'd be going, yeah, you've got to rent it, and like, you know, like this Blu-ray disc and all. I was like, I don't really know that, but it was a job, and I had that job for about 2 weeks, and then in the interim, I'd applied thinking I won't get it to select on this because it was like what someone else in my course had got the correct. There was like one for Kerrang, one for Mix Mag, one for Smash Hits and Select. So EMAP was the company. And one of the girls on the course had got the Kerrang one. So I thought there's no way two people from the same course are going to get it. But I did. And I remember years later, it was Alexis Petridis from The Guardian now, who was the editor. And him saying to me, I sort of only picked you because I did a similar course and I kind of knew at least you'd be at okay levels. I was like, oh, thank you. It did pay off. And so I quit that job after a week. The editor absolutely had a go at me. But having sort of sworn I'm not going to be a music journalist, I could sort of see the way reviewing DVD players was going and thought, you know what, I'm out. I'll see you later. So yeah, I was very lucky. I ended up at Select, my first sort of proper job, which sort of got me into music journalism rather than I never had to do the thing of sending in reviews and asking to do like regional reviews and stuff, which a lot of people have done. It's kind of the way loads of people got into it. I sort of cheated and bypassed that.
Okay. Were you back in London for that type of thing?
Yeah, I was back. I mean, I came back after Cardiff. I came back from uni. I came back and moved straight to London because my parents were both from London, and so I'd lived not far from London. So I was always going to be in London in some capacity.
Yeah.
Relatively close to Loftus Road for Queen's Park Rangers.
Yeah, fair play on that. And then is this around like 2000, 2001, like the big kind of shift in music, like an exciting time to be in
Yeah,
music?
it was great because when Select folded after 3 months, it was like this thing of like it folded. The last issue had Coldplay on the cover. It was December 2000, and we were like, "Oh, it's really going." And then literally, I think a couple of weeks later, the Strokes, the first hint of the Strokes appeared. And I remember one of the publishers who'd taken to this because I started writing for Q, who were the same publishing group, and one of the publishers who was there, who'd made the decision, sort of gone, "We should have hung on, shouldn't we? If we'd hung on 3 months." Select probably would have rebooted into like the magazine of the Strokes and that like exactly what NME did at that point, and it would be fine. And so it was, but it was really exciting because I was like the youngest person on Q by a mile. I was the one who sort of was going. I'd be up for going to lots of unheard of bands and small gigs and things like that. And so I got to see loads of these bands coming through really early, where perhaps some of my colleagues who'd were slightly older and were more in, had sort of come through on the U2 sort of tip and that kind of thing, perhaps didn't go out as much. And so I was able to pitch a lot of this sort of thing and write lots of these things. So I did like, so whereas like the NME would be like, you know, they'd have the Libertines on the cover 4 times by this point. I'd interviewed them. I remember interviewing Pete and Cole, one each every day for a week. This was all they could get in Q. It was like this strip column. And it was like one day, one the next day, one the next, and it was called call baiting. And I said, but because it was a bit like, well, they're a bit too small for a feature at this point. So for me, as the young writer who was like, can I do this band? I got to do loads of those people quite early on, which was exciting.
That's it. What would they like to deal with like early doors then?
So that was amazing. That was really good. So I'd seen them play at Cherry Jam when they'd done that residency, which is this weird little club, which was like a basement basically by Royal Oak Tube Station. And I'd seen them play there. They did like everything. It was every Thursday for a month, and you couldn't get in the first one. It was so busy. I got in one of the later ones, and then I saw them with British Sea Power play there, which was amazing. And I was just like, wow, they're really chaotic. I really thought Pete looked like Danny Goffey at the time. It's just like he looked so much like I remember seeing Danny Goffey going, "Are you actually related to him?" And he's like, "No, mate, no." I was like, and then
I know what you mean. It's something in the eyes, isn't it?
yeah, it was. And at that time, now you say it and you go, they don't look anything like each other. But you know, is that someone's come through? So I saw them quite a bit, some of those small gigs and stuff. But the that interview was great because Q weren't really sure about him at that point. I think they'd had a new to Q, but that was around their Reading slot. But they hadn't really done any more than that, and it was great. So every day of the week, I'd have to ring them up. They're on tour in Spain. Do you remember the Bandits?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about them on here.
Yeah, who they loved. They were like couldn't sing the high enough praises. So he rung them up, and in first day's Carl was like, "How's it going?" And it literally was the piece was called call baiting, and all you did, you just run, "What did you do today?" And you'd ring someone every day for a week. It's one of these sort of weird gimmicks that would work in a monthly magazine. Ringing someone every day of the week in the era of TikTok sounds absolutely insane. Why would you do that? But at the time, it was like, "Oh, this is quite novel. This is quite a weird thing to do." And so Carl, the first day was great. Oh, yeah, he's chatting away, lovely. And then the next day I get Pete, and it's like, "Oh, Pete, you've got to do this thing." And he goes, "I'm going to read to you from the books of Albion." And then I got this weird, no questions, it's this sort of monologue of him just going, you know, "Wolfman calls from London." I was like, next day I get Carl, how'd it go? I said, "Well, he read to me from the books of Albion." He's like, "Oh, God. Oh, right, okay, what do you want to know?" And it was thinking. And then on the last day, by complete, well, not fluke, but complete unfortunate, I was interviewing Pete, the last one, and our shared beloved Queen's Park Rangers has just been knocked out of the FA Cup by, of all people, Vauxhall Motors.
Wow.
They like used to be the, well, I think they're now called something else, but they were like what the former Works team who'd become semi-pro, and they knocked us out in the FA Cup. It was really embarrassing, and because obviously I knew Pete was QPR, I was just like, "Oh, did you see that Vauxhall Motors?" And he went, "Oh, no, no, oh yeah, yeah. Well, how do you know about that?" When I was there, and he's like, "You QPR, mate?" And I went, "Yeah, yeah. I'm really sorry. What do you want to know?" And he was literally lovely then, and answered every question. And suddenly it was like there was no more books about him. It's like, "Yeah, what do you want to know, mate?" Yeah, well, great. And we had a great chat, and so that was my sort of key into the Liberty. And ever since, every time I saw them, if I see Pete, I'll be like, "Oh, do you know this guy?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know that guy. Yeah, come over." That's, so QPR, the shared, what's the word, suffering of supporting QPR between me and him has served me well, and I hope him.
Don't suppose you ever bought his fanzine, did you? His QPR
No, but my
fanzine?
dad has the very first one. So
Yeah,
my
really?
so this was why when the Libertines came out, my dad was like, "You've got to get, check who with these. I know that boy," and I'm like, "You don't know him because we used to give him lifts to matches." I'm like, "Pete Doherty." He's like, "Yeah, that's him. Yeah, definitely." Anyway, a few weeks later, he produces this. He's got the very first fanzine that he didn't, he paid for. Pete gave it to him in exchange for him giving him a lift to a game.
All
He's
right.
got this thing, and then years, like literally this season, Pitt's the first time in ages, obviously, because there was a bit of a thing where Pete came when he wasn't at his greatest, and I think he got thrown out of the ground. He was sort of scared to come back, and then this season he came to a game. I can't remember which one it was, and he was standing outside waiting for someone, and my dad went. My dad walked past. He always meets his mates, like my dad, and he sort of went, "All right, Pete," and he went, "I know you," and he's like. He goes, "No, you used to give me lifts. You definitely, I know you." And then they ended up having this chat with my dad and Pete. And he's like, "Do you know my son? He worked for the NME." "Yeah, I know. The guy who keeps mentioning QBL." "Yeah, I know him. Yeah." And in the end, my dad got him to meet this guy who he'd wanted to meet for years, an old supporter called Alan Barnes. He was a mate of my dad's. He's, used to have lived next door to Pete years ago. And he thought, "Well, if you come here, I can get him." And so him and Pete trotted down the street with all these fans going, "Where's he going?" And he met him, and it was a sort of a lovely thing. But yeah, we did have the fans. We have got the fanzine at home somewhere. And yeah, my dad was vaguely, he didn't write for it, but he was around when it started.
That's it. So how come he gave him a lift then?
Because he was 15, and then like he was mates with this guy called Alan who lived, who
Okay.
he could make my dad, and he's like, "Oh, can you give us a lift to the ground?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's all right if he comes, yeah, jump in, sort of thing. So it was through him really.
That's quality.
So yeah, he's got a better Libertines Connect story than me. So
And then, yeah, I mean, were you like buzzing over their music type thing? Like, I mean, obviously they ended up on NME before they released anything. Like, what was the vibe around at the time?
I mean, from the outside, because I was being on Q, we'd be like, "What are they doing? That's amazing. They're putting this lot on the cover." There's one single. I remember getting the single on CDR, What a Waste, and being like, "Oh wow, this sounds really exciting. This is really good." And I remember because a friend of mine was working with British Sea Power, and they were sort of in the rough trade orbit as well. I remember sort of being more aware of the Libertines than perhaps I might have done if someone had just gone, "Oh, here, check out this," because they were saying, "Oh, there's this other band they've got who are quite exciting." So I mean, yeah, I remember that getting those first singles to listen, like, "This is amazing." The Strokes obviously had sort of set the tone for that rough trade revival of, they sort of come out. Then you had the Libertines where there was a slight, for a little bit, it was like, "Oh, they're the English Strokes." No, 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 they're not. But and then I think by the time the record came around, then it was like, okay, we can see why the NME have gone so big for this. And I remember sort of bumping into NME journalists who I knew, and they'd be going, "Oh, it was at a gig they did in this squat in Bethnal Green, or they did this." And it was just, in terms of stories and stuff you want to write. I mean, the frustrating thing for me with Q was because it was only a monthly, you'd be going, "We should do this band. They've done this, they've done this, they've done this." And like, yeah, but it'll be old news by the time it comes out. And I can see why NME went so big onto it, because every week there was a different story. The whole kind of, I joined Enemy just as the Gorilla Gig thing had become a thing, but even before that, before they were letting phone boxes and turn up to this and doing that, there was a real like, "You never guess what they've done this week," or "They've done this, this has happened," or that kind of thing. And it was an amazing time. I remember, like, for example, when you were just had such a run of great bands coming out, and having sort of been a teenager during Britpop, and you think, "Oh, I've missed that. That's amazing." You had the Blur, Oasis, all these bands coming through. That's not going to happen again. And then suddenly you're going, "Oh, the Strokes have come over, Interpol have come over." I remember being at the AES first ever UK show, at the Barfly, and everyone crushed in like this because everyone who hadn't sort of seen the Strokes had to be there for that. And I mean, that was insane. Just this three piece, you go, "Oh god, they are as good as everyone's saying they are." It's not just hype, sort of thing. And then obviously then the British ones, Libertines. I remember Franz Ferdinand playing a gig at the Africa Centre. I think it must be about 2003, 2004, and that seemed to me to be a really big moment of like, I think there is something going on, because if we've had all these American bands, Libertines are out, but suddenly there's this other band who are absolutely amazing, playing this weird venue in Covent Garden that no one really goes to normally, and it was just like, wow, this does feel like there is something happening here. And obviously, looking at what NME was doing at that point, there was a real jealousy because they were going, oh yeah, every week this is happening. There's this sort of band, whereas I'd be going to Q editors, should we do this? But in fairness, eventually, it came round. It's just I think it was slightly slower because you only had one issue a month, so. What I used to find happening was I would be like championing someone and they'd be going, yeah, we could maybe do new to Q. And then the next week you go, are we going to do them then? Like, no, we're going to do them as a feature. And they'd sort of skip me and go up to the next level. So,
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Was there a bit of a hierarchy type thing?
yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly for me, because I was really, I mean, because normally Q had a reputation for like you'd sort of written at other places and then you got to Q and I'd sort of bypassed that by being at Select, and when Select went, them going, oh, you can work on the staff at Q for a year, and then I went freelance, and I worked on a lot of the one shots, so I'd sort of got a lot of. I got in the Q door probably a lot earlier than perhaps I would have done if it just been left to me, just my amazing writing alone. So yeah, there was definitely a thing where there were people ahead of me, and so yeah, there would be times where you'd be like really banging on the door, saying, "Oh, can we do this?" And people would listen to you. They'd be like, "Yeah, that's a great shout," but then if it was going to be like a 4-page feature, someone more senior might get the go first. So yeah, it was definitely a hierarchy in terms of writers, which I mean kind of continued. I think with all the thing. I think also how long editors have known certain people. How much they trust them, how much they want to editors, having been a commissioning editor and later on myself, you often just like commissioning writers you like dealing with and like reading and that kind of thing. So there was a bit of that to go over, but it was never. I never felt like. I mean, I always felt very grateful to be at Q because I say this was literally my first proper job. Select was only 3 months. So my first proper job as an adult was writing for Q magazine. Just like, really? Okay, that's a bit weird. I always remember getting Q100 when I was a sixth former, and it was like they just had Q and A's with everyone. It was like this sort of fat, and it was like Damon was in there, Noel was in there, and just going, wow, I'm getting to do this. It's better than having a proper job, isn't it?
No, definitely. Yeah. And in terms of like your interviewing technique, were you just kind of like, was that getting honed organically type thing, or did you have influence from other people or anything?
When I did my magazine journalism course, there was an element of learning how to do interviews. I mean, a lot of it is just, it's not so much anyone has ever said to me, you should sit down and ask questions like this. I mean, I think that the biggest sort of external influence will be people say is make sure you always ask, if it's a new studio piece, where was the studio? Who played on it? Check the spelling of the names, that kind of basic stuff. But I mean, no, I mean, I just sort of did it by doing it, if you know what I mean. It was kind of like, I quite enjoy. I mean, that's the bit I still enjoy the most is like interviewing people. I'm one of those writers who is like, and I do the interview, and then you sort of go, I've got to write that up now. I do, and once you get into it, it's fine. But I do have that moment of, oh yeah, I've got to write all this up. So no, I just sort of did it. I mean, a lot of it was just there was no one, really go and just get on with it. I was really one of the things I think that really helped me was the back page of Q, this page called Famous Last Words. And I was
Right.
quite asked to do a lot of those because they'd often be short notice to get someone big names. So I'd end up doing people like Nick Cave and Johnny Marr, and to me would be like, oh my god, wow, that's amazing. And so it was very much in at the deep end, and you had set questions to ask, and then you had to sort of use your judgment to where you went off the back of that and follow ups and stuff like that. So I think doing those were really sort of helpful because you had then the structure of like, I know I've got 10 really good questions I've got to ask, but I've now got the leeway in it to sort of go, oh yeah, okay, this is what you asked. But it's interesting. I remember talking to Jamie T, it was, and he was saying to me like how people were doing an interview. He was explaining one interview technique where someone sort of came in and just sat there and he just spilled his guts because he had nothing. And I was like, does that work? And it's funny. Like one thing I've never really discussed with other writers or like staffers at NME or anything like that is what's your interview technique? It does seem to be sort of everyone sort of does their own, and it's not really like anyone going right. This is do this, do this, do this, bar the obvious like make sure you get the important information.
Yeah, yeah. I guess like it's you're guided by a passion for it type thing, like how you're feeling in the moment or whatever.
Yeah, and also there's that thing as well because there's other things like where you go, I've got to ask this question. So there's one question often get in most interviews. They'll be like, "You've got to ask this question. You don't want to ask it because it's either rude or it's the really." And it's just knowing when to ask it. And that's the thing is like if you just go in with your sheet of paper and you just go down the list, which some people do, it works. But for me, I would always sort of like, oh, go in here, do here, maybe it changed it. I remember doing a really terrible interview with Marquis Smith. which I was quite illustrative in terms of like, and I remember it was for the Select CD, and we used to have this CD on the front, and it was one of the tracks off the Unutterable was free on it, and I rang him up and said, "Oh, Mark, I'm for the interview." He goes, "Oh, sorry, mate, I'm really busy. Call me back in 15 minutes." Went, "Yeah, no problem." I have no idea what happened in those 15 minutes, but he was in such a mood. And all I had to do was ask him about one song. I didn't think there was no agenda there, and he literally spent the entire interview going, "I thought this was about my album," and I'm like, "Yeah, it is, mate. You know." So, and that was terrible. But I remember learning from that actually be. I've ever since then, every interview I've ever gone into, I'll have the questions written out in a form that I can read. Often I'll print them out just so I can look if I've look what's going on rather than scribbling. Because that's the one thing that I learned was like from that interview was just have another question ready. Because I just thought, oh, I'm only like 10 minutes about his one song. What do I need? What more do I need than that? This will be fine. And when like they evaporated in the first 2 minutes of his rage, it's like, right, what can I ask now? So yeah, that was probably that Marky Smith probably taught me more about interviews than anyone else and how not to do them.
No, I can relate to that. Like, I think early doors, for some people, I would make very little notes, but now it's like, I always got to have a pen and paper,
Yeah.
to line the next thing up. 'Cause that's what I found hard with doing. I mean, I went to a festival at the weekend,
Mm.
and
So it Kaiser cheese, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah, and ended up getting like an interview with We Are Scientists, which was like backstage, but it was all a bit new to me, and like, I couldn't make notes on what to ask next, and it's like, don't know, you can get your own in your own head a bit, I guess. It's like you got to try and stay in the moment rather than thinking, right, what I'm going to ask type thing. It's a bit of a balance type thing.
Yeah, I mean the tough thing about like this, and obviously if you're doing it on camera, like with the scientist guys, is there's an element of performance to it. I think there's two
Mm.
kinds of interviews. So the interview that I would do, if you were to watch me do a print interview, it would probably be, you can sort of leave pauses and go, okay, I'm just going to write that. Okay, right. Whereas if you're doing it that you know of who are going to watch it, they are two very different things. I ended up, I don't know quite understand how, but when I was at NME, they went after the first year I was there, they went, "You can do all the winners interviews at the awards," and I was like, "What me? What? Why me?" Well, there's other people. Like, no, you can do it. And so I'd literally for every NME awards I ever went to, apart from the first one, and when I went to Q, I picked it up again. I would be the person with the microphone winging, and those kind of interviews are just an entirely different thing to anything I would ever do in print, or if it was just going to be written up and you won't see me in it at any point. But yeah, and I totally understand, yeah, how tricky when you're just going, I need to ask this next question, I have to make sure I ask this, but also they're telling me something, and I can't be seen to be just going, sorry, mate, what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, I mean, were you gagging to get to NME then? Because, like you said,
Yeah.
it's weekly and it's more, I don't know,
Yeah,
more
no
flexible.
disrespect to Q. I loved Q. I obviously went back to Q after Enemy, so I did like Q. But I used to see Ace Thornton, Anti Thornton around quite a bit, and I always used to joke with him, going, "You're like, come on, you guys need to come in, big money transfer. Come on, get me on board." And I think when I realised I wasn't going to play football, and there was no danger of me ever playing on Loftus Road or anywhere like that, I was like, well, the next thing I've got to do is I'd like to do the Enemy cover because it's the magazine I grew up reading, and I'm in this world now. And but there was never I'd never really like I knew a few of the guys who worked there and the people, but I didn't really I didn't know Connor at that point or anyone like that. So I never had sort of actively tried to get there. And then out of the blue, after about 3 or 4 years of freelancing for Q, I got a phone call from Julian Marshall. Said, "Oh, there's this job going at NME for assistant news editor." He was a news editor at the time. "Would you be interested in applying?" Because I've asked 3 or 4 PRs who they would recommend, and everyone has said your name. I think it just sort of shows the level of like the sort of, because I was doing sort of front section newsy stuff at Q a lot of the time. So I think, yeah, so I was like, okay. So I went and met him and sort of he was like, this is what the job is. Would you be interested? And I was like, okay. And then I went through the interview process. But sort of with that sort of confidence of like the person interviewing me is not necessarily on my side, but knows that I could possibly do this. And I did get the job. So I didn't know Julian at all at that point. I've obviously become friends since, but I didn't know him at that point. Went to the interview. I remember they said to me, there's going to be a subbing test. And I've just had this list, and I've memorized the names of band, like who all the Killers were, who all this for the era, who all the members of Sabian were, how to spell this and all that. And I remember, so I memorized all this stuff for this test, thinking it was really serious. And if I didn't get, if I couldn't tell them that Ronnie Vanucci played the drums, I would be out. That would be it. And I did this thing. So anyway, got through. Then I had another interview with Connor. Got the job eventually. And then for the launch of that year's NME Awards, they had a pub quiz for journalists. And I remember going to them. We weren't in it because obviously we were cheating, but and I remember they started doing the questions, and it literally was the subbing test. It was like, "Who is the drummer?" And I was like, "You fuckers!" I took that seriously, like it was some sort of exam. And it basically one of the subs had written this quiz, and they went, "I'll just give it to the people." They say maybe do a pub quiz, and I thought it was like this sort of serious exam to qualify as an NME news writer.
What year was that then? What year did he start NME?
I think it was 2005. I think so. I did this the other day. I was trying to work it out. It was my first cover. I didn't write anything for it, but the first issue I was involved in was the Others cover. And so
Yeah.
yeah, with him with the megaphone. But I remember like I was talking to someone about something the other day, and I'd knocked an entire year off that I thought I'd gone to the enemy a year later than that. But I think that was 2005. We'll have to fact check that. But,
Yeah, I think Connor said that was like the best-selling new band front cover or something of his time.
yeah, I don't think I wrote anything for it. I might have had like a tiny thing in the news section, like, but I remember getting this job, and I was thinking, do you know what? Because I've been freelancing for you, I'm going to take a few weeks off. And the Julian was like, do you know what? Could you start? Can you start straight away? We know you're freelance. Can you start straight away? Because we're really up against it. And the awards are coming, and I was like, so I was going to go on holiday, and I was like, okay, no, I'll start straight away. And then it was like the first week of like, I think I wrote that much. So, I've had this week off. But it was great. But I remember being so intimidated. I remember going like buying a like whole new sort of wardrobe of clothes a week before because I was like, I have these guys in this office. They're going to be so cool, and they're going to look at me, and oh my god! And obviously because I'm still friends with a lot of them, they're very cool. It's massively cool. But yeah, I remember being really like, oh god, what if they just think I'm some idiot? And this guy it was because it was the NME. It really meant like you'd see people around. They're pretty cool. You'd know people, and then. But the great thing about it was, I guess after a couple of weeks, I felt like I belonged there. So I must have been doing something right. So, and no one
Yeah.
ever went, right, fuck off.
And
Sorry, can I
how?
swear? I just realised I
Nah,
should.
it'd be fine, mate. Yeah. And how was the vibe different? Obviously, so it's a weekly magazine, but what was it? How was it different to Q and other places?
Well, the big thing about the NME, which probably isn't quite the same anymore with the internet, but I've been solely on the internet. And what you don't appreciate before you go there, and I don't think you realise when you're there, and you only realise when you leave again the other side, is you are so close. I was certainly at that time, you were so close to what was happening in music, because I would ring up PRs and say, "Oh, Q were doing their albums of the year. Could we get Jack White to do this? Could we get so and so Brown and Flowers to do that?" And they go, "Yeah, we'll get back to you about that." And then invariably you'd get the B team list together. I remember one year Jack White's PR very kindly sat him down and made him type me an answer for this Q best album this year. I know you've asked me all year for stuff for him. I'll get him to do it. Whereas when I went to NME, literally the first week, I rang up one of the same people. Was like, "Could we get Brandon on the phone to talk about?" Yeah, sure. When do you want him? Because in PR's heads, it was the cycle, and I don't think it was any diss on Q. It was just Q's later in the thing, and so by the time it comes around to ask for that, the deadlines are longer. Whereas NME is like, when do you need to do it? Tomorrow, okay. And that process, and obviously the respect people had for the title at the time, and its reputation, all that, just meant you suddenly went from being sort of part of it to be literally up close to it. And always remember it was Arctic Monkeys was made me realise. So obviously I was there from the beginning of Arctic Monkeys right through to I think Suck It and See was the last album I worked on. And then when I went back to Kill, I was on AM and we did them again. And it was so weird because up to that point I had literally known every detail of every Arctic Monkeys release. Out, what they're doing, what tours they're playing, where they're playing, what Alex thinks about this, what Helen said about that, and thing. And then when I did it again for AM, it was like, oh wow, I've literally not had that bombard, and it just showed you just enemy. You were just so with all these releases, you were so close to the process of records coming out in the studio pieces, the features, the reviews, the sort of controversy. Don't go too early. Don't put them on the cover. Do put them on the cover. All this kind of stuff. And it was like, and it came out every week, and we were doing the website, so it was just like going from Q, which was particularly no internet era of Q. Oh, this is quite nice. You could just think about stuff, time to write stuff, to just like 100 miles an hour. Right, that needs to be written by 3 o'clock, and then we need to do this, and we need to do this. That interview you've just done, have you typed it up yet? That kind of thing. So it was, it was definitely a change of pace and definitely a change of perspective in terms of where you saw records and bands and artists being.
Yeah, yeah. And like Arctic Monkeys is an interesting one because I think Connor said that's when he knew that that like Enemy had lost control of the narrative or something, or like being in control of it. Did you view it a bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, Arctic Monkeys were, I think, were like, I mean, you had the Libertines, which I obviously wasn't there for the beginning, but you're like, that's amazing. You know, Oasis was still doing amazing business for NME at that point. You know, you put them on the Gallagher on the cover and you do really well. I remember when that great Tim Jones interview when Don't Believe the Truth came out, which I realised is 20 years ago because the album was released 20 years ago this week. So and you just go, wow, this is amazing. And you're kind of thinking, well, it's a shame that we missed out on X, Y, and Z. And then this band happened. I think even for, you know, even knowing at the beginning, I don't think anyone would have said they're going to be this, you know, genuinely era-defining British band. But even right from the beginning, it was like, this is exciting, you know, with the Fake Tales of San Francisco 7-inch that was about out, and then going to seeing them at concerts and all the fans knowing the news. And you know, from my perspective, doing news, this was exactly what NME needed and exactly what we as journalists wanted, because it was like, you know, there was a story every other week if you wanted it, if you wanted to tell one. They were really interesting. The quotes were great. They were nice blokes. You could have a chat with them as well. And I mean, to me, I was there obviously past when Connor left, and I think he'd have been on, was it Humbug? I think would have been his last record. So I was there for Suck and See and all that stuff. I remember Matt Wilkinson, who used to do the news desk with me, and then went on. Obviously, he did loads of stuff on the Round AM and the Glastonbury's and that kind of thing. And it's no, I mean, for me though, I thought they were, you know, absolutely exactly what NME needed at that point. And I think it's where Connor perhaps might be saying about losing the narrative. I think that was the point where you kind of aware that you weren't the only people telling the story of bands like that, you know, that there were all these websites that existed and there were other media. I think the big one that changed it, I think, for NME, which was tricky, was the tabloids and the broadsheets suddenly took music coverage seriously. I think around the time, maybe just before um, Arctic Monkeys, you know, the music pages in a lot of magazines might be one writer and, oh, yeah, like one single a week and that kind of thing. And then in that period, then, you know, everyone was sort of chasing the same kind of stories, although often they were our stories just being sort of retold. Oh, I hear that Arctic Monkeys do like, it's all NME.com. You know, come on. You know, it's like, yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's where the coverage of music outside of like the sort of scandal and tabloidness of it. So, you know, obviously Oasis were always covered by the tabs, but it would be more about the, oh, you know, look what's Liam done today. Oh, look what's happened here. And I think in that era, then you suddenly had the thing where Bizarre, for example, would go, Arctic Monkeys' new album's coming out and it sounds amazing. And you go, hang on, don't they normally, isn't it normally Scandal or whatever, you know? And so I think that was where perhaps NME wasn't the only voice sort of telling me, and there was then that competition for access and being the first to tell that. But I think Arctic Monkeys, in a way, were that sort of like Oasis, like Blur, like the Libertines. They were that last band where people wanted to read about in NME. I think that's what NME always been lucky with. It had that thing where the perception. Certainly, I had this as a reader. The perception was if NME were telling the story, it was more authentic. It was close to the band because you just knew they'd done them from the very beginning and they'd got up to that point. So, you know, even when I was there, if we put Oasis on the cover, it would sell really well. And I think a large part of that was people just associated reading about Oasis in NME. I certainly did. And I think Arctic Monkeys were like the last band, that possibly Saban as well, around that time, where people would go, if it's in NME, then I really want to read their take on this story because they have this connection to them because they were first. They've done them a lot, that kind of thing. I don't know what it is, but there's just that. I think it felt like the place that you wanted to be hearing about Arctic Monkeys. But obviously, there was a huge competition. I remember the Observer Music Monthly did this thing on their first year. We would go, imagine if we'd had that access. But then we probably did, but we just had it in lots of different bits. So.
Yeah, I think the point he made is that I think he turned it to the Carling tent at Reading in 2005, and it was a packed tent with everyone singing the lyrics, and he was like, "Wow, we've not even done a feature on this band yet." I think obviously the influence of the internet, I guess, is what he was getting at. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was at that. It was amazing, you know, to hear people knowing all the words to all the songs before they came out. But I mean, did that stop NME? Were we pushed out by that? I'm not sure. I mean, I remember going to do. I mean, humble brag. I'm the only, as far as I'm aware, the only journalist they ever let in the studio. I went to New York for the end of the Humbug sessions.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
and telling that story, and I mean, with the actual album cover again. Here's my claim to fame. I had to duck out the shot for the album cover, walking along, and the photographer went, "I'll stand there for a sec." And that's the album, you know. So there was. It wasn't like we were suddenly like they'd open everything out, and I think you know what was where Arctic Monkeys and that kind of thing it kind of bypassed was perhaps you know enemies gatekeeping of like, well, we think they're great and coming through, but even then, I mean, everyone had heard Fake Tales on that and on that 7-inch and gone, this is amazing, we've got to cover them. There was a lad up in Sheffield who was saying, you've got to cover them, you've got to. So enemy weren't that slow to be on them, but yeah, I guess it was the first time you could hear That's probably the bit where you kind of went reviews probably don't matter anymore. That's probably the element because everyone's going to hear everything before it comes out or as it comes out. And I think that's that's a big chunk of music journalism. Whereas the review probably was really useful from an informative point of view of like whether you should buy a record or not. That was probably the moment where the review became more than ever a piece of entertainment rather than the guy because you could cause now everyone can listen to it for they put on Spotify or whatever and listen to the record and go this is my opinion on it. So whether you engage with the review section of magazines now or not I guess is entirely different to when say I first started reading magazines and you would go 7 out of 10, yeah, I'll give it a go then, but I'll buy it.
Yeah. And in terms of reviews, like how would you be ever like influenced by editors like Connor in terms of, what you should be giving a record or anything or how you should be viewing it?
I mean, not me personally. I mean, I didn't really write a lot of reviews, particularly NME, just because of doing news. The last thing you want to do is turn up to an interview and be like, "All right, I'm here for the NME. Like, are you the guy that gave us 4 out of 10?" So I only tended to review things I liked, and stuff that no one else would. Like the what I'm a bit of a Walkman obsessive, so I would review the Walkman because no one else would do it. It's like okay, in bands like that. So no, I was never unduly influenced. No one was forcing me to give the Walkman higher marks than I was prepared to. So, if anything, I'd have given them higher. So.
Yeah, fair play. No, I think I was talking to Young Knives and they said their manager ended up punching, was it Alex Miller
He broke his finger, I think. Yeah,
or something?
I've got to be careful because
Over a poor review, I
it was
think.
at a party. It was after the NME Awards. I do remember it because it was a real scandal, and it was like it was early days of mobile, not early days because obviously mobiles, but the early days of like WAP and Mo because he'd gone to a party at one of the hotels and we were at a party at somewhere else, and it was like all these Chinese whispers on text messages going, "Alex Miller's had to fight with Young Lives manager." We're like, "Young Lives, really?" Because we thought initially, I think the Chinese whispers were like, the Young Knives had a fight with one of our journalists. Young Knives. And it's like, no, it's the manager. Oh, okay, right. Not to shade anyone involved, but it was like, Young Knives wouldn't fight anyone. Oh, it's called the House of Lords. Come on.
Yeah, I think
I
this
do
is
remember that
something.
incident. Yeah.
I think it was before it was even published, like they got wind that it was going to be maybe 6 or 7, and after obviously he went for him, he put it down even further. So fair play.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I remember, yeah, that was one of those ones where I mean, I think that was kind of interesting. Because the young, yeah. I mean, that record in retrospect is probably a lot better than we thought it was at the time. But the Young Knights might have been the first or among the first bands, and that probably unfairly so in that, oh, so much of this stuff, which actually, that was one of the attitudes that sort of crept in, which was a bit, I remember someone saying to me, oh, I'm bored of Arctic Monkeys. And I was like, who cares? The fact readers love them, look how big, I mean, you look how, they've got on, the one British band whose music streams at anything approaching sort of, proper modern pop star levels. It's them, and but someone's going, oh, yeah, I'm bored of them. Like, but our readers want to know every. I remember seeing them. I think it was on the Humbug tour at Wembley Arena, and it was at that point where I think people going, oh, this British guitar thing, well, not British, but just guitar thing generally is it going to last? Oh, there's all these bands coming through, and I remember seeing them, and they had a mosh pit, and I was like, what the hell's happened here? This is bigger. It's actually bigger and more insane and better than we, because we'd all been at those sort of little gigs. I remember seeing the Old Blue Last and things like that and go, oh, it'll never be as good as this. And I remember like, we're not going to play. I think they said they weren't going to play arenas and then obviously had to play arenas because they were just that successful. And I remember, and I think that was the point where people go, oh, where's it going? And yeah, I remember seeing this gig and there was like circle pits and stuff. And you're going, wow, it's not stopping. It's getting even bigger. It's getting more exciting in a way. So, and I think, yeah, there was a bit of a kind of malaise where people go, oh God, it's another guitar band. But it was actually in retrospect, I mean, that is it She's Attracted To?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of always reminds me of North American Scum by LCD. But yeah, that's a really good record. I think they might have been one of those ones because there was a few bands that came out around that time where people have gone, oh, and I think people have gone, oh, it's not been so good. But actually, if you go back and listen to a lot of those records, and the fact that a lot of those bands are still touring and doing incredibly well still actually shows they were probably a lot better than perhaps they were given credit for by some of the critics at the time.
No, I definitely know what you mean. I think I appreciate Young Knives a lot more in hindsight as well.
Well, it's like the
But
Wombats are the one where I don't really know them, so there's nothing personal. I've never taken them seriously. I remember
yeah, I know what you
coming
mean.
out
Yeah.
and that song about dancing. You're like, yeah, all right, okay. And they're huge. They're literally huge. I know, and I've worked with people like younger than me who are like, going, oh my god, they're my favorite band. They're amazing. I think they headline festivals. They absolutely. And you sort of go, oh yeah, okay. That's which is A, you shouldn't like everything. I think that'd be weird if you liked everything. But B, you're like, going, wow, okay, these bands were having a massive impact at that time. And I think not all the time, but sometimes there was a little like, oh, it's the bubbles burst. Whereas actually those bands have, connected with big audiences, and it continues. And like Young Knives, I think, much better than they would perhaps given time for it, but credit for at the time. But
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, even as a fan of NME and stuff, kind of felt the same. Like it just felt a bit daft at some point, but like maybe, like you said, a bit harshly.
I think we were quite weird. I think what we didn't realise at the time, and I always remember having this sort of acute feeling at the back of my mind that NME might fold on my watch, and there was nothing ever commercially about it that anyone was ever going. But obviously, sales were going down for reasons we can discuss later if you want. But that wasn't necessarily the quality of the magazine, and I was always worried, oh, are the band's good enough? And it was only like after I'd left and somebody went to me, yeah, but you were lucky when you at NME because you had all the big bands, and you were like. Actually, we did, didn't we? Not in a kind of way that, and I think that's sort of the joy and the curse of NME is like NME. You're always thinking the generation before had it better and bigger, and
Mm.
Britpop were probably going, oh, we didn't have Joy Division, or we were going, oh, we didn't have Blur and Oasis, and oh, the people who followed us were going, oh, they had Arctic Monkeys, it's kind of, and I think that's always the thing. So you're always in that sort of perpetual thing of like it's not as good as the old days, but also this is the most singularly exciting thing we could be doing at this moment. And it's kind of, and I think there's sometimes that moment where you just don't, you're not really appreciating what it is at that moment because you're thinking it was bigger before. We need to find the new stuff. We need to get this done. And also, everything happens so quickly, and the deadlines are so crazy on the paper that you never have a moment. You go, do you know what? It's pretty exciting now. And I think if you look, 20 years ago, you look at all all the bands that are now playing these huge gigs and still going and all this kind of thing, and whatever you think about the state of current music and what that nostalgia circuit might have an impact on. These bands are playing to lots of people for a reason, because the people who are going to those shows love them. So they're obviously good bands, and there was obviously a big connection between those audiences and those artists. And so it was probably a much big, Rich, I would say it was probably a much more exciting. You're doing a pod about this era. It's like much more exciting time than what perhaps we realised at the time because you're in it and you're in the middle. And that's I think goes back to that point I was saying about like with NME, it's so fast, it's all happening, and it's only when you take that step back that you sort of go, oh yeah, wow, that's quite. We were literally like, faces pressed against the window following some bands.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of like video coming in and stuff, was that a big shift for you or not really?
It was for me personally because because I sort of got to having done news for like a few years as assistant. I then took over as the news editor and then did that for it felt like ages. And then they were like, you know what, you should probably because by that point as well, it went from like we used to do 20 news stories a day on NME.com if we could be bothered, if we remembered. Oh yeah, quick do stuff. And and then it sort of became more and more part of our job. And then when people realized the numbers we were getting, it then the sort of suits took an interest in it and were a bit more like, oh, actually you should do 30 stories a day and you should use keywords and SEO and all this sort of stuff. We should put comment in. Oh, God. And so I think by the time I'd gone through that and kept still doing the paper, I think the editor then was Chrissy was like, you probably need a break from this. Would you like to? So I became associate editor in charge of all the video content. That was my role my last role at NME, which was amazing because no one really bothered to oversee what I was doing, despite this beat. So we were just it was me and a chap called Phil Wallace who was basically a rocker. I don't know quite how he ended up at NME. He was the technical guy, knew he had to film stuff and got all these great video guys to work with us. But there's if you go back through the NME.com archive, there's all these walk-ons and videos with really heavy rock bands. And I just had to let him do them because it was like, yeah, okay, Phil, he's got the kit. Okay, we'll do that. But within that, then I was able to sort of do these sort of great little videos with, all sorts of people. So, but it wasn't like TikTok. It was like, I remember doing one with PJ Harvey that me and the guy who filmed it were like, that was really good. She gave us some great answers. The interview was brilliant. The footage we've got is amazing. So it was about half an hour long in 2 parts. It wasn't Snapchat. So.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think my attitude to the NME video when I went into that was very much like let's make it like the NME cover feature or the NME features in terms of like nice, good interviews, well shot, etc., which possibly isn't where the music video world has ended up. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's more like a visual version of a feature that you normally see in NME type thing, yeah.
And also, I was doing a lot of the interviews, so I'd be like going out and be behind the camera and talk. So instead of like going quick, do a dance. I'd be going, oh, let's talk about the race. So we do these quite long interviews that were quite good, and I remember like the video guys would be cursing me, but it was all good practice because a few of them have gone on to make like films and stuff. So it was good practice for them to do long. But we did also have this other one where we had these ridiculous questions where it was our version of a snap, what would become the Snapchat or TikTok interview was like, you do like your main thing, and then you'd go, right, we're going to ask you these sort of questions, and it'd be like, how often do you wash your jeans? I remember was one of the big questions. How often, pizza, what topping of pizza you have? And it was like allegedly quick fire, but even that couldn't be said to be quick fire. But I always remember we did Grinder Man with that. So we'd done the proper Grinder Man interview, and they were like, oh, can we ask you some extra questions? And like Nick Cave's like, all right, I suppose. And so we start doing this, and we go down the list, and it's like, how often do you wash your jeans? I don't wear jeans. And he's wearing head to toe in double denim because it's grinding. I'm like, it's a video interview. He's like, oh, can you edit that out? I went, it's a video interview. Oh shit.
And like the budget for interviews as well was that obviously a lot bigger at the time, where could you fly out to different places and interview people?
There wasn't a budget. So there was internally there was a budget for us to employ editors and video. Like, so whoever shot it would edit it. So it was stuff was done properly, and there was like a commission for them. There wasn't a budget for us to fly anywhere. I think
Okay.
I think I flew once back to Arctic Monkeys. We did when Arctic Monkeys played Old Trafford. We managed to convince them that we should do this sort of special issue that at the time, and one of the pieces that went with it, I did a print piece, but we also flew a video guy out who was allowed to film my print interview. So that was like just to get the extra content for that. But that's the only time I can remember on my watch that someone got to fly. I mean, we get to go on a train occasionally, but not fly anywhere.
All right. Where was that? Where did you fly to? Sorry about
So that was Turin. I remember
that.
that.
All right.
Yeah, and we did the photo shoot on the Italian job where they drive around the roof on the racetrack. We did the photo shoot up there. I don't know how we got there. We got to this shopping centre that is the old Fiat building, and their tour manager went, I think I found you a space to do it. And they're like, okay. And so we get in this escalator, and we all go out, and we're like, and I'm going, oh my God, this is the Italian job. And the tour manager's like, exactly. And everyone else is like, what the hell are you talking about? Because Artie Mike's like, what? I was going, hell, did you know the one with the cars, the minis? And he's like, what? I hope they've watched it since. But yeah, yeah, that was the flight. Yeah, we did it up there on the roof.
Yes. So you've always had a good relationship with them type thing.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I feel. Yeah. They'll tell you. They might tell you different, but yeah, I think so. Yeah, always got because it was weird. I mean, initially we used to do this thing on the news desk just because you talk to people so often, where you'd almost have your own beat. So I would do certain bands. Jules, who was the news editor, Julian Marshall would do other bands, the other people. So he was the Arctic Monkeys guy, but he stopped doing news midway through, and so I took it on to him. Famous Worst Nightmare. So I sort of met them vaguely by that point, but I sort of came in. I remember the very first time I met them was at the Mercury Prize properly. When I don't know if you remember, they won it, and Cookie was like, "You've already asked that in the press conference. You already asked that. Asked why you asked." And it was like, "Oh God!" And I got Helders and Alex first time I properly met them. I sort of seen them in a room before, maybe, but not properly met. And PR was like, Anton was very kind of speaking. 10 minutes, they've won the Mercury Prize. I'm like, okay, great. And I was like, I was unaware that all this had gone on, and they're all in a mood. And I just thought, I've got to break the ice. And so I said, hey, well done, lads, you're up there with them people now. And Helders was like, my mum loves that album. I'm like, how old's your mum? She's like, God, she's not much older than me. It's like, and that break, and then it was great. And from then on in, it was, yeah, I think I've had an okay. I mean, I liked interviewing them. I hope they like being interviewed by me.
Yeah.
He once slept through one of my interviews and declared it the best interview he's ever done. So
say that again, sorry.
Cookie, we were in New York, so we're all jet lagged, and I did an interview with them, and he slept through most of it. And when he woke up at the end, he was like, "Is that it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, best interview ever. I've always. It's funny because with them, they've got this real sense of humor. So I think that got particularly early on got quite lost in from the particularly the mass media of like, oh, they're these arrogant little kids. It's like, actually no, they're just quite funny.
Yeah, I feel like he was involved early on with interviews, and they stepped away slowly type thing.
Yeah, I don't think he's that into bothering about. As I say, he slept through one and loved it. So maybe I unfortunately put him off them. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, talking to photographers from NME, and they're like all about building trust with bands type thing. Was it similar for you as well?
Yeah, particularly doing news, because I mean, I think what people don't appreciate from an artist perspective And I'm friends with, some artists I interviewed at the time because you just, like saying, you do the same people a lot and you sort of get to know. But I think what we didn't appreciate, it's journalists, and I think retrospectively, if you could say something and then next week on the Wednesday it was like block capitals, 48 point on a page, and it's like, hang on, that was a throwaway, and sometimes it might influence your relations with other artists and all that kind of thing. And so I think there was a real element of like going like, if you say something particularly doing new, like it's not going to be. I mean, obviously, it never happened to me that someone said something terrible that I then buried. There was no sort of anything like that. But I think people knew that if they said something they hadn't quite phrased it right or whatever, I wasn't going to take the mickey and make them look like an idiot on the page 4 of the NME the next week. But I think that's why all artists had obviously there was a whole thing recently with Hardfire and Kooks and Connor where they were discussing the sort
Mm.
of relationship between NME and the entity of NME and what NME did for them. And I think it's true that I think most of the artists, and you talk the ones I see now, really appreciate what NME did for them. And I can see where Connor was annoyed that he thought, perhaps people were going, well, hang on a sec. But equally, I think every artist had from the Arctic Monkeys down to the smallest one at that time when it was coming out in print every week, had a sort of standoffish relationship with the entity of NME. Just because it could do things that us as the writers and the editors there wouldn't really even appreciate. Like you could say something and then next week it's got you into something really weird, or you didn't quite mean that and that's happened there. And I think that's probably what they were getting on about, that sort of sense of like the entity of NME was always a bit of a strange one. And there was always, every band always thought another band was doing better. I remember talking to big bands and going, well, why don't we get what they're getting? I'm like, you're on the cover. And like, I was like, oh, we good. There was always that thing. So I think that's probably where that came from. But I think that was the thing but going back to your point, your question, sorry, about you would try to build trust to go, yeah, if you say something to me, you're not, I will do my utmost to try and make you not look like a dickhead next week. With him, obviously if you are the one, then that's your thing. But I think I did all right with that. I mean, I remember apparently I inadvertently started a war of words between Klaxons and the Rapture, which I only found about years after. Because I wanted to do the Rapture on the second record in the news section, and people, they're a bit, they're a bit old. I mean, they hadn't made a record for like 3 years or something, and so I managed to sort of shoehorn them into New Rave, which was kicking off at the time. And I think I'd said, "Oh, would you say you like the Godfather's New Rave?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, we are." And apparently, and then obviously that then got round. This is a good example of sort of that wariness of that relationship and what NME could do without him. And so I only did that out of the desperateness to get this band in the magazine because I thought they were amazing. And I think the next week's headline was, "We're the Godfathers of New Rave," and I think the Klaxons had messaged them going, "No, you're not." No, we didn't mean it. So I think that's that kind of is sort of to demonstrate how that something that could be really well intentioned because of that weird the NME was this weird weekly focal point. It was brilliant for that. It had that thing of like whether you were in it or you weren't in it, you were you liked you, it hated you, whatever. It was a real focal point for music every week, and it charted when records came out. I think in a way records come out now and they sometimes shoot past because you don't have this point in the week. Even if you read it or not, there was always a reaction to it. Whatever its circulation, this idea of producing a newspaper every week that sort of vaguely sums up some of the music that happened in the preceding 7 days. And I think, yeah, for artists, that could do weird things to both in good and bad ways for you. You could have a much bigger career than perhaps you were going to have, or something innocuous you said about New Rave could end up getting snotty messages from a rightly disgruntled band on the line.
Yeah, I mean the feedback element's interesting. Obviously now purely social media, but back then, like how would people feedback to your articles type thing?
Or what, from artists? I mean, 'cause you got letters. That was always the fun. Like, I remember, like, when you first time, you're like, "Do you want to edit the letters page?" Oh, I've been waiting my whole life for this. Like the 12th time, I'm like, "Do I have to?" Yeah, occasionally. I remember once writing a review of, is it Chris Karloff, who used to be in Kasabian?
Oh, okay.
And I did a review of his solo record. I think it was for Q actually. So this was a bit further on, and I sort of did it under the thing of like, well, I was a bit like, because I knew Serge quite well, and I was like, I don't want anyone to like do an axe grind review. So I'll do it. And I wrote this sort of, and I think the innocuous line was something. It's a glimpse of what Kasabian might have been like, but they're not. And I bumped into him about a year later at a photo shoot for Q, and he was like, really like, fucking hell, can't believe you said that. And I'm like, what? And so it got a bit tight, and eventually we sort of like, come on, tell me. And he's like, well, you said this. And I was like, no, I didn't. This did. And it's in the end, I had to find where someone had sort of unfortunately scanned the page and put it on the internet. I found it and was able to go back to it and read what I'd read. He goes, "Oh, that's all right then." I went, "So that's what it's like to be misquoted, is it?" But it was that kind of experience. Yes, occasionally there were little things like that. But yeah, but that was all resolved and fine. But yeah, so I didn't have anyone else. I've never, I mean, obviously there are stories. I remember reading about it. What an artist trying to fight someone in the backstage area at Glastonbury in the late 90s and this kind of stuff. You know, I never, fortunately, ever had any feedback delivered like that. It's all seemed to be quite okay. So.
Yeah, fair play. And you mentioned New Rave. Like, what did you make of that at the time when it all came in?
um, I can't remember where it started. I mean, we were constantly, we just got, there was a few of us who'd constantly got into this thing of like, we need to invent a genre because everyone else has and we haven't. And I remember there was like Crazy Prog was one we tried because Crazy Frog had just come out. And there was bands like the Poor Old Secret Machines and stuff. We'd go, they're Crazy Prog. No, they're not. And they couldn't take off. And then I think someone else sort of went, this is New Rave. And I'm like, oh, that won't work. And that was the one that worked and that became a thing. So yeah, I remember being so jealous of the fact that I think it was Alex Miller who sort of dubbed New Rave and it had become a thing. It was great. I mean, that tour, I remember they did the double tour. There was like the rock one and the rave one. I thought that might have been, was a bit, maybe a bit too polar. I mean, you should have had just the one, but I think they just wanted to get 8 bands on rather than 4. But I always remember seeing, I saw Claxons quite late. I saw them supporting Arctic Monkeys at the Forum when they did the warm up for Reading. And I was remember being a bit like, oh, if they're new, are they be massively dumb? And I've seen them like, they're amazing. God, why have I taken this long to come and see this lot? They're absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I was all in favour of that. I remember there was a brief period where there was lots of glow sticks at all gigs, which I know a lot of artists blamed us for because people would just throw them at the stage, not on purpose, they're trying to hit anyone. But I remember we did an NME.com, was it 10th birthday or 20, yeah, probably 10th birthday party, and it was CSS, I think, or yeah, CSS and Kasabian and Noel Gallagher came and played with Kasabian, and they were all like, "Where all these glow sticks come from? What's this? Throwing them? I'm not having that." So, but no, it ain't very. I thought it was great. I mean, whether people believe it's the most, whether it like the most authentic scene, it definitely did the job of, you know, getting a sense of there was some art, there was definitely an artistic cohesiveness around those sort of bands at that point, and those artists, and obviously Claxons went on to win the Mercury Prize, which was a great moment. No, good, great fair, you know, a great band. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And talking about tags, got to ask you about Indie Landfill. Like, I think
yeah.
Mark Beaumont said it was a failing of NME journalists not come up with a better tag. But what do you make of it?
Um, I mean, I think it's kind of a weird one, isn't it? I mean, I think the trouble with Indie Landfill retrospectively, because there were these a lot of bands that definitely weren't ever considered Indie Landfill or preceded the use of it as a tag and all this kind of stuff, were included. There was that massive Vice piece. There were people
Yeah.
going like, no, they can't, they were, you know, but I mean, blessing Preston for the Ordinary Boys when they did it. Going, no, they were way before that was a thing. I mean, I think there was a sense of there was a few bands that majors had then gone, right, we need a band because they've having a successful band, they're having a successful band, you know, major labels do have a habit of going, well, if they've got one, we've got to have one. And I think it boils down to the way they're run as companies and market share being really important to their metrics as a for success, as opposed to just how many records we've sold. And I think there's like, oh, we need a band in that position because they're getting this much market share with their band. We need to get some market share with a band to bump our other market. Going, what about the music? Is it? So I think that's where it kind of appeared from. I think there was a bit of a thing where there was a few bands who perhaps had got signed who were like the fourth or fifth or sixth wave of quality wise. But I mean, I do remember it being around. I mean, I don't remember anyone. It feels like it's one of those phrases that's been used much more in retrospect than it really was at the time. I remember it being sort of vaguely banded around. I think because it started in the word, I believe, but I don't think anyone remembered it or knew that's where it had come from. I think it just sort of appeared, and I remember it. It wasn't like we were called. Oh, this is an indie. Yeah. Did anyone ever in the real like fans go, I'm really into indie landfill? I
No,
mean,
I guess
I
like
think it was. You could tell it was that scene, that bubble, which actually, by surprise, had started in 2000 or 2001 with the Strokes. It had sustained quite a long period of uh, music and artists coming through, and I think by the time that indie Landfill sort of started to appear, you could sort of see that actually that unprecedentedly long period of good bands coming out was starting to come to an end. But that is kind of the natural cause of it, just because, if you were sort of 10 when the Strokes started, by 2009 you were 19, you wanted to do something entirely different to your old the people in the year above at school. So you can see why it was happening. I don't think it was totally a reflection on what's the word, that all the bands in it were terrible, but I think the enthusiasm was going elsewhere.
Yeah, I think like probably every era has its landfill part, but it doesn't get coined as such, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other thing, is that indie landfill sort of is the start of social media, isn't it? Just about, I remember like being on MySpace around the first Arctic Monkeys record, and obviously, so that's probably about the time where the word, because what I found was really interesting is what the initial phase of social media did, is that all the people who didn't like stuff, instead of just me going to you, I really don't like that band, they went, I really don't like that band, and somebody else went, oh, nor do I. And for the first time, I think in the history of music fandom, you suddenly had a voice for the people that didn't like stuff, because they could just be on the internet, on Twitter, whatever, going, hey, I don't like this, I don't like it, grid, I don't like it. And I think a lot of those bands got that tag because suddenly, whereas it would just be like you're the one person in a group of friends who didn't like about a particular band, and that would be the end of it, there was suddenly a momentum applied to this negativity. And it's interesting. I think a lot of things that happened in music first sort of then happen in politics and the wider world, and I think definitely that sort of trolling negativeness came out in music Twitter first. Oh, I really don't like so and so. No, nor do I. And then now it's like, I really don't like that policy. Nor do I. Although so yeah, it was probably indie landfill. Can we say something grandiose? As indie landfill was probably a foretaste of the thing that would cause Brexit or something like that. Someone much cleverer than me can work that out, I'm sure.
That's a clip sorted, and
Indie landfill caused no, it didn't.
but yeah, how did things pan out for you from there, really, in terms of like moving on from NME or whatever? What was the catalyst for that?
But weirdly, I thought it was too old. And retrospectively, I probably, it's funny. I was interviewing someone the other day, and they were going, I'm 30 now, I'm really old. And I'm like, mate, you're not, you're really not. I remember being like mid-30s, I thinking, God, I'm really old now. I don't know why, because I'm 46 now, and I'm like, God, I was so young, carefree, and could do what I wanted, and all this sort of stuff. And so it was like, I remember being like, yeah, I'm too old. Maybe I'm a bit old to be an enemy. So I should try. And this job came up at Q where they were going to redo their website and all that kind of stuff. And having been at Q and obviously have a lot of affection for the title, and also a lot of people I knew were there at that point, I went back to that job. Although I was sold a bit of a pup in that the editor was like, yeah, we're going to build a new website and all that. And I got there on day one. I'm like, okay, so what's the freelance budget? Oh, you haven't got one. Okay. This website, when's this getting redesigned? Because I can't read it. It's like the type is this. It's like, oh, well, I don't know. Why have you employed me? I could be sad. And it took, it got to the point where the NME, the Q website got upgraded because they tried to shut it down. And I set it up as a blog again and got
All right.
direct the, what should we call it? The address to this blog that me and a chap from Empire helped me rebuild this site on WordPress. And it looked a million times better. And everyone was going, oh, it's about time they've upgraded it. And it's like, no, they shut it down technically. I paid its hosting for like, I think the entire time I was there. Got to pay me back when I finally left. I was like,
Really, that's mad.
yeah. I mean, this sort of shows you a little bit like where the sort of the publisher's head was at in terms of the internet. Eh? Do we need the internet? They just hired me going, we've just got the guy who was making all the videos at NME.com. There's a video revolution happening, and I've been making with a decent-ish budget to be able to employ really good cameramen and editors to make video interviews, and you'd come back and you go, okay, can we do a video? And no, can't. There's no budget for that. So it was interesting. It was trying, but it did make you do sort of stuff that was a bit different and thing. I ended up, there was a platform called Audio Boom. I don't know if you remember that, where
Yeah, I remember the name. Yeah.
you could do an interview and you could put the audio straight up online. And we tried that out at one of the Q Awards, and then from there, a large part of what Q was then was this sort of instant podcast thing where we just interview people on my phone, and then at the end of the interview, take a photo and put it up online, and that seemed to do quite well. That was quite fun. That's a sort of proto Q podcast. So that at least gave us, content, because obviously you didn't have the time then. But also it meant I could interview whoever I wanted because no one really was looking over my shoulder because I own the site technically.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, NME Awards. Got to ask you about stories for that. You got any up your sleeve?
I mean, as I say, I actually organised 2 NME Awards.
All right.
And I'd never seen, because I've been given this job of pretty much since I arrived at NME of like, you can interview the winners and the nominated in the photo room. I'd never seen it. I think I saw one NME Awards for about 5 minutes in the very first year I was there. That was it. And I was organising this thing. And I'm going, oh, what happens next? Oh, okay. So that was an interesting experience to be organising this thing. But then, I remember we had the Foo Fighters playing and PJ Harvey and that, or people like that. And then the next year it was Weller and all this kind of stuff. And you're like going, oh, wow, I wish I could see this. So that was a good show. Yeah. But no, it was fun. Well, I mean, we got Jarvis Cocker to do it. That was quite fun. He hosted the awards. So me and Chrissy Murison had to go. He was the editor. Had to go and have a meeting with him and his manager Jeanette Lee, and go like, "Would you like to do this?" And he was like, and we talked to him to do it, and it was just amazing. He was like, it was all like catchphrase related, and people acrobats and things, and it was really interesting because it's the only awards where I think people sort of, because he was an artist as well, whereas normally you'd get a comedian and then the room would be like, oh, yeah. Because he was one of them, they all shut up and listened to him, and that was kind of felt a real moment in the room. Having a whole awards where people respected the host. That was a good one. Stories. I remember being really excited when Paul Weller remembered my name, and then I remembered his name. Of course, Paul. But I mean, the great thing for me with the 2 years I organised it was just watching the sound checks. I remember like watching PJ Harvey sound check, and it was like me and I think Chrissy and no one else in the room. This is amazing. You could watch and they'd obviously play for longer. You go, wow, this is what it's worth doing. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of all the stories. Trying to think what I can repeat without getting. I remember doing one interview with Jamie T when he won Best Solo Artist or Best Male Solo. I can't remember now what solo artist, wasn't it? And he came and we're doing the interview, and he spent the entire interview, because the award was the bust of our former editor Steve Sutherland's finger.
Okay.
The entire awards jabbing me in the ribs with it. And if you watch the video, you can sort of see me doing this on it. And he's I don't know, I was doing the interview, and at the end of it, oh, Jamie, thanks for that. We stopped, and he goes, "Blind Stokes, you should be a war reporter. You're amazing."
Yeah, what's that dynamic like? Everyone's had a few beers. Did you have a few as well while you're doing those after the winners' interviews or anything?
Oh, while we were doing the interview, yeah, but yeah, I mean, it was so chaotic. I mean, people just kept coming through, and you're just like, and who? I remember interviewing one of the in-betweeners, having not realised. I knew he'd won Best TV, but I hadn't seen the program, and I didn't know I didn't know who he was. And I don't know if that interview's still up, but it's like at the end of it, I was like, who is he? I know he's an actor, but I don't know what. So it was a lot of like, so you won, yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, great, thanks. Did you read the NME? Yeah, that was a terrible bit of a. Like I said at the beginning, always prep. Yeah, no, it was quite chaotic. It was good fun though. I mean, because you would just grab it, go think, and they've sort of taken on a life of their own. Every so often, like they'll be on some Muse channel on Instagram. They'll be like that. Someone will have ripped it and put it up, and you'll go, "Oh, it's me." It's like, they are because we used to get sort of really great. There's one I think Matt was really one of them was really drunk, and it was and it was like he was having a go at me, but it was like a joke. But I don't.
Okay.
I think 20 years later on Instagram, it's quite come across as a joke in the way that it was at the time. But yeah, no, they were all good laughs. I mean, yeah, I probably had a couple of drinks for those. Yeah, they were fun. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I remember we did a really long, heartfelt one with Pete, which was amazing, Pete Doherty. And the only reason it's this long is basically the art director said, keep it as long as you can because we want to get a photo with this person, and him, and this. And so I did this quite long. You all right? It was genuinely meant, but ordinarily I would have just put him out the door. Thanks, mate. Yeah, congratulations on your award, sort of thing. So it was nice to have that time to do this quite sort of serious interview. But yeah, the motivation was, could you go and have your photo taken again?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Did the type of interviews with Libertines change over the years, type thing?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, those early ones were they were sort of quite fun and lightweight and breezy, and particularly doing the one where it was every day of the week. And then yeah, there was a few, particularly doing the news section in the sort of darker end of with obviously what was happening with Pete. I never thought I'd be stood outside a police station at 1 in the morning just in case he came out, or I went to Uxbridge Magistrates Court once. All right, sort of thing. That was a bit weird. So there was a few interviews around that time. I remember doing one before the MTV Awards, which was a bit like, oh god, this is quite thingy. And then it sort of, as he's managed to sort of get his life back into a place where it works for him and he's okay as a person, that it sort of got better. I remember doing one with him for Q for the Cash for Questions, and that was when they headlined Truck, and that was kind of like, well, this is chaotic. Fair play to the lads, the rest of the band for keeping this going. And then I've done a few recently with him where you just go, wow, this is amazing. And what's really amazing is chatting to Pete now is so much of his memory has survived that he'll go, oh yeah, do you remember that thing that happened at this forum? And you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And it's all suddenly come, it's there. Whereas you'd be doing the interview at the time going, is he going to remember this? Is it like, So you know,
Yeah.
it's heartening to see sort of long may it continue that he is seems to be in a place that is good and working for him. So
Yeah, I thought that reading his latest book, I was like amazed by how much he remembers, like the detail.
yeah, no, it's amazing. It's this sort of his recall for stuff and weird little things like oh yeah, a lot of football matches and things like that. So, so
Yeah, yeah. And then the coolest. What's
oh
your
yeah, yeah,
involvement with the coolest?
yeah. So I wasn't there when it started, and I remember thinking, what a silly name. If it's a list, can it be cool? Can a list be cool? I'm not sure about this. And then, yeah, I remember that started. I remember sort of hearing stories about the people who thought they should be in it themselves the first year or whatever. And I think I must have been there for the last couple, which was weird. Yeah, and every single, I think I wrote, yeah, Helders I wrote for one year because that was always the thing. After the first year, you get in the first year as a band. So this band's only you get a band. But I would get in the first year in the front, be really high up. And then the thing you'd always do in the second year was put the drummer higher than them. Don't know. And it wasn't on purpose, but it just seemed to be this weird logic that took over where it's like, okay, well, they're cool, but, it'd be a bit cliche to say the singer's cool again. Let's say the drummer's cool. It's like, that seemed to, and it was, as I say, no one would sit down going, should we do the drummer thing? It was just like this weird publishing kick where you go, oh yeah, let's make that. But I remember like the last one that was in print ended up as one page in the news section because they'd shot it and then changed their mind. I remember I had to put it through in the news section, and I thought, okay, this publishing real estate has ran its course now. If I'm doing it one page, go and see it online, sort of thing. But it's funny though, going back looking at them when you see them, the spreads at the time, because I think that's the thing. Is when I remember being at the time, going like, oh, it's you grow up reading like NME or whatever. You kind of think, oh, if only I'd been there then when this has happened. If only I'd been there when this, and you don't often think what you're doing at that moment is the same thing because you can't attach. It's just happening. You can't attach the same sort of worth. And I always remember Lightspeed. The first time was Lightspeed Champion doing a gig at the Madame Jojo's, where he got like an all-star band to play covers of the New Rock Revolution. And I remember me and his PR at the time going, could you stop him being so nostalgic about something that happened 3 years? We were at all this, sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, let's play this. And playing one of the Rascals drumming for him. And I remember that, and that was the first time I went, wow, okay, we have covered things that have done that. And then recently seeing putting up the old coolest stuff going up and going, oh, I've interviewed there and that happened. You suddenly go, oh yeah, it was an area, there was some substance and some uh something about that era that was quite exciting. Maybe the coolest was not the best name for it, but it definitely was a good way of capturing, the fact that there was more. It's. I think what's interesting about that kind of era, that decade, and up to that point, is that's the last decade of these scenes you get where because you can't connect with someone on the other side of the world who's making the same music as you, the scenes sort of tend to be about not necessarily about being the same genre, but there's sort of a share. Artists gravitate to people who had sort of similar ideas and similar outlooks and that kind of thing. And I think what those coolest, if you look at them now, show you there was a bit of a thing where there was another sort of an alliance scene where people making different kinds of music would sort of befriend and have connections and talk to each other and certainly do it in the media, whereas perhaps they don't do anymore because you can be in a scene with some, if you're a psych band from Denmark, you could be in a scene with a band from Japan or wherever. It's kind of, you don't have to talk, who your influence, who do you see, you don't have to talk about the people around you. And I think what those coolest pages capture is that since there was something going on in a similar geographical space, mainly London, but Britain, America, wherever, that the NME was there to cover, which was exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And just in terms of, like the decline of print
Mm.
media, like how was that managed at NME? What was that like being involved with type thing?
Well, it's interesting because I think my pet theory for the what caused the decline of print media is the internet, but not in a sort of glamorous way of like, oh, you can read everything everywhere. It's that when I bought the NME in the sixth form, you had to buy it every week, no matter who was on the cover or what was the articles, because you needed the live ads. If you wanted to go and see a band or wanted to know who was going to be on tour, there was like 10 pages of live ads, and you go through it and you ring up Star Green and you get a ticket. And the moment gig listings, not even gig listings, the moment you could buy tickets online, and therefore it was in someone's interest to email you or put it on a website to say here are the dates, the tickets are going on sale. The NME sort of lost that floor. Now, obviously, who you put on the cover and what the articles were and how good or bad the writing was really important for the top end sales. But there was a thing up to that point where you bought it anyway because you needed the live ads, and it didn't matter who was on the cover, it didn't matter whether you liked the writers or thought they were the greatest thing ever. And the moment they lost that, it just made a successful issue could be really successful, but a bad issue could suddenly be a lot worse. And I think that just ended up the way it then got managed out. This sort of surety from like, well, we were selling, 10 years ago, we were selling 100,000 copies a week. And now some weeks we can sell 60,000, other weeks we can sell 12,000. This is the business is, we need to do. I think that was caused by losing this sort of bottom floor of live advertising, the monopoly on live, on basically tour going on sale information. And as a result, the era that I was in, particularly at NME, it felt like there was a lot more panic about what could make it be really big. And so there was a lot more like, let's put this band on the cover, let's do let's do this artist. And there was a lot more experimentation. There was a lot of received wisdom that didn't last a year. Like I remember we did one cover, I think we did a Pete Doherty, it was albums of the year, and I remember being told at the end, albums of the year to come sort of thing. And I remember being told after that issue came out, don't put him on the cover again because that didn't sell. And about halfway through the year I was going, well, we can't do Pete, that's a shame. Because they go, no, that's the best selling issue of the year so far. And you're like, oh. And I think it just made all the planning, and I think it would have been fine if we'd just been allowed to get on with it. But there was IPC, obviously it's big. It was a big title for them, and I think they were like, oh, how we need to sort of get in and fix this or work out what's going on. And there was a lot of, in particular, I remember in like the middle phase of my time at NME, there seemed to be a lot of obsession with who was going to read it in 5 years' time, and not enough focus on who was reading it that week. There was a lot of like, oh, we had a focus group and we got 15-year-olds in and they ate some pizza and they all thought you should do this. And you're like, and we were never really allowed to go to these things. It'd be like the suits going, oh yeah, we've had this focus group. And you'd be going, but they're 15. The idea of them reading a print magazine in an era where they've got the internet, the people who are going to keep reading print and are going to bolster it are the people who've grown up reading print because it sort of makes sense to them having this thing in a week. And the idea is if you can keep it going as those 15 years get older, they might go, oh, you know what, that's quite cool. I'd like to find that thing out. And instead, it was always there seemed to be a bit of an obsession about we need to change because 12-year-olds now won't be reading us in 5 years' time. And it was just a bit like, okay. And I think that just made things go a little bit jazz, for want of a better word, in terms of some of the. Whereas I think the NME, if you go back to the NME in the 90s, they sort of knew who their stars were. They knew when they could take risks, when they shouldn't take risks, balancing it out and sort of thing. There was a lot more, I think, magazine craft going on. I think we were in an era where there was a lot of pressure to fix whatever this thing was without ever realizing what the cause was. And there was a lot of like, okay, let's try this person. Oh, it didn't sell. Oh, let's try this one. It didn't sell. Oh, we've annoyed these people now. And it's like, rather than go, well, actually, if we do this many covers of these people, then we can do that. And I think that just because of that, there probably wasn't as much forward planning as perhaps there was played 10 years before. So there was a lot of like, oh, great, what are we going to do? Sort of thing, which is exciting. And it was good. It was great fun to be part of. But I think in terms of a product, it possibly didn't hasten the end, but it certainly didn't help make print relevant in that era, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, what do you make of NME.com now? Like very eclectic. Do you think that's just the way it has to be? It's that thing. I guess that's the way music is now. But
Yeah, the moment yeah, it was already getting eclectic when I was there. It was like, oh, we're going to suddenly do that. We started doing film. And you're like, okay, that's in. It's like, what NME.com does brilliantly is it's taken NME and it's turned it into a badge for good music. That's where its strength is now. It's not a particular genre of music that perhaps the previous iterations of NME in certain decades were identified with a particular kind of music or a particular group of bands at that time. Now they've sort of turned it into it's a really good trusted source for reading about music and music news in particular. So it's funny for me because we started doing music, doing the music news, and it was, oh yeah, let's do some web stories. And now to see that being the kind of main bit left is like, oh well, we weren't totally wrong. We were it was a good job we did some of those stories now because at least it sort of set up the foundations. But not to say we had any sort of thing with their numbers and whatever they're doing. But yeah, it's a different NME. It's funny because every so often it pops up on like on my like socials feed, and because I followed NME from when I was there, and it will say desperate housewife actress says this, and I in my head I've got this little voice goes, why do you? And then you go, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's fine. That's the important thing about NME, and I think that's the great thing. That is the NME's strength, is that everyone feels they own it. So you own your era of NME. The people who read it in the 70s, they own that era. The people they thought, what you should put these bands on the cover, these artists on the cover. This is our era. When it got to the 80s, it's not as good as it used to be. The people in the 80s, these are the bands. It's not as good as it used to be. And I think that's the same. Even for me, having worked there, when I came through, it's not as good as the 90s. People going to me, your era isn't as good as this era. It's like that's why NME was so successful for so long. Is that something about it? People feel they owned it and had a vested interest in it, whether they were a writer or a reader or a photographer or one of the bands in it. And I think that is why it is a unique, why it lasted for so long, why it still lasts, and why it's a sort of unique thing. So when I go, why do they care about this actress or, that TV program? It's like you have to go, it doesn't matter. It's not your enemy anymore. It's their enemy, and it's the people reading its enemy. And it's, I remember likening it to someone. To me, it was like being there. I think it's the closest experience I'll ever get to being in a political party, like being a member, like working, like in a government sort of in the thick of it style, because it was so passionate and everyone felt they own it, that a lot of the debates about who should be in it or who shouldn't be in it were almost like, this is the policy the government should be taking. This is the the message that's hitting well in the heartlands. It'd be us going, it should be this bad. No, it should be that artist. It should, so I think that's why we're still talking about NME, and why NME still survives and people care about it, is because it has this unique appeal for the audience and the people creating it. They just care about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was enjoying your blog where you've posted a lot of your old articles, particularly the one with Julian Casablancas, 2009. Like, what was that like? Was that quite cool? Like interviewing them, like with a bit of space from his set type thing.
Yeah, that was because I'm really slow at putting stuff up, but I do occasionally get one. So yeah, that was the one. I think when we did the albums of the decade
Yeah.
issue, which I did the kind. Yeah, it's really weird. I ended up doing the reviews, and the reviews edit ended up doing the features, but which was really enjoyable for me. It was a great one. But no, that was great because it was like I sort of begged and begged, look, they're going to be number one. You've got to get them on the phone, and he sort of did, and it was a really good interview because he was like, it was 10 minutes, first thing in the morning for him, last thing of the day for me. I think it was Australia or something, and he just was like actually really open to like, oh yeah, you know what, this is actually a good thing. He wasn't taking the mickey out of it, which obviously if you'd said to Judy, if you'd done that interview with him in 2001, he'd probably taken the mickey. So I think he genuinely was like, oh, this is a great thing. And yeah, it was just great to hear their sort of memories of it, all the sort of little stories that didn't come out at the time, like recording it in this studio on 2A Street in Lower East Side of New York, and then going across to the bar and playing early mixes. And if anyone went, what's this? They'd go, right, sign up to our mailing list, all this sort of stuff. And also having a debate about which time travel rules the interview was conducted under, because I was like, what would you say to yourself back then? And he's like, well, if it's Back to the Future rules, I can't change it. It's always good to have a sort of weird discussion that you didn't think you were going to have with sort of a rock star who you really admire.
No, yeah. No, I really enjoyed reading it. It's a few things I'd never known before. So it was real cool.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, this is the weird thing about it, because obviously NME.com is the thing now, but we never put the actual magazine articles online, because obviously there was a real sense of you want you to buy the magazine, and there was no real way of them migrating them online. So there's an entire archive of artists who are massively covered online that isn't online at all.
Right, yeah.
It's never been put online. I remember because it's quite interesting taking the Strokes as an example, but when Is This It had its official birthday, loads of people went for the July date, which is not its release date. It's a Japanese, it's Australian release date, because the band went on tour in Japan Australia first, and Rough Trade said, yeah, you can release it there a month, 2 months early, I think, as it was supposed to be, because they're touring, and it's also obviously there was only just starting, so the danger of it leaking was so small, and obviously Wikipedia has turned that into it was released on such and such day, July 2001. Whereas there's an entire story about, and I watched this from the outside, about the NME campaigning to get the record brought forward. They campaigned to get them moved onto the main stage at the Reading Festival that August, and then they campaigned that the album then got brought forward. It was supposed to come out in September, the same time as in America, and it got brought forward, so it was the same time as I think it was the midnight of that festival appearance. And then obviously there's a whole thing where it's supposed to come out in America on September the 11th, and it then had to go back because obviously 2001, that's when you get the Twin Towers attacks. And this entire thing had been erased from that retelling of the day that Is This It came out. I remember people going, oh, it came out today and it changed my life. And I was like, well, no, let's listen to Australia. and that's total revision has happened. And I think a large part of that is because a lot of that archive isn't online. And so yeah, every so often, if I remember, I've got it handy, I will pop something up, because it's just not online anywhere. And those sort of stories are getting written out by the sort of the wholeness of people just going, Wikipedia will take whatever the earliest date is, and if you Google it and don't click through, it will go, that's the date of a record, and all that, and people might say, well, it doesn't matter, the first time it comes out, that's the release date. But there was a fantastic story about the release of this record that is beyond just what an amazing record it was as well, and the different covers and all that kind of stuff. So it's at the time it made so much sense. Don't put the articles online. We want people to buy the magazine every week, but none of it's now. There's so much of that. There's so many massive stories, so many great pieces of writing that just aren't online because we didn't. Same for Q as well. I mean, Q we wouldn't put stuff on. When people would buy the magazine, occasionally you see people scan pages and that kind of thing, but it's and obviously going back and back for like a couple of decades worth of music journalism, but.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be great if they did that now. If they
It
just
would,
like,
because I think there's a lot of stories that are contemporaneous that are just have got lost or overlooked, or people, it's only like you know what it's like. There's certain articles you just remember, and you go, oh, I remember that time, yeah. And you were and then you might be say to people, actually, I think it's this. But a lot of the time, people say to me, oh, you wrote that, and I'm like, did I? I don't remember that because it was so much of it, and I think yeah, it's a shame that those sort of contemporaneous reports are sort of getting superseded by the kind of there's nothing that there's anything wrong with them, but the kind of the nostalgic reevaluations of stuff now going, oh, it's 20 years since this album came out, so we've written a piece about the release of that record, and actually you're losing the energy and the excitement and a lot of the detail. Not that should necessarily be in there, but it's a shame it's not elsewhere for people to go and have a look at as well. It's interesting with Oasis coming back. So many people, there's been a bit of a wave of would you like to write about Oasis? And it's been great to go back to like my early, like the first interview I ever did with Noel was at NME for Don't Believe the Truth. And going back to that first transcript, I mean, oh wow, I've never put that in. There wasn't, because it was literally a page in NME in the news section. It wasn't a feature. So there's so much of it. You were like, oh, this is really, why didn't we ever run this? So.
yeah, well, they always great value to interview. Did you interview
Oh,
both of them type thing?
oh no, I've never interviewed Liam actually. No, I don't.
Okay.
I had this weird thing where I always, when I got into being a music journalist, I always wanted to do Noel and Damon, and I did them both at NME, which was like teenage me. But no, that was amazing. I remember the first time I did Noel, that someone said to me like, "Get him on football first. Talk about football to begin with." All right. So I managed to bring up we talk about QPR and Man City and all this sort of stuff, and then that was great. And then they just amazing, and like literally the first joke at Liam's expense follows straight on afterwards. And I remember I went to interview Damon, and someone said to me like, well, he can be a bit, if he challenges you in the first interview, don't give in. He likes to just, get a sense of people. And I remember him saying to me, so this is the classic. I mean, this interview is just going to be like, God, that guy banged on about QPR. But he said to me, oh, it was for the Good, the Bad, and the Queen. He went, oh, it's my new record. It's all about West London. You won't get it. And I went, well, hang on, mate. I live in Shepherd's Bush. My old man's from Ladbroke Grove, and I support QPR. Which bit of West London am I not getting? He went, oh, okay. And then we had a really lovely interview, and he was really sweet. And ever since then, he's been lovely. Even though he's a Chelsea sport, he's been absolutely lovely. And then at the end of the interview, he turned to Paul Cinnamon, who was obviously in the Good, the Bad, and the Queen, and went, "Here, Paul, you should speak to this lad. He sports QPR. His old man's from Ladbroke Grove, and he lives in Shepherd's Bush." And Paul Cinnamon turned to me and went, "That's a good start." And obviously, externally, I had to be like, "Yeah, mate." Internally, I'm like, "Yeah."
Is that the way? Is that the key to a good interview? Do you think is just trying to be as genuine as possible type thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got an agenda, and sometimes you have, like, particularly if you're doing a piece where you're going to ask something that they're not going to want to be asked about. Like
Yeah.
I had to ask Craig David for Q about I met her on a Monday and all that because they were like, you can't ask me. Oh no, both selector. You can't ask me about both selector. And I'm like, I've got to do it. So sometimes there's stuff you hold back and you win people over. But yeah, I think genuinely it's like you're there to do a job. They're there to promote something usually. You know, unless there's no need to be all like I remember there was a real phase in like early 2000s of journalism where people would write these most scathing interviews and all the people had done was released a bad record in their opinion, and it would just be like, why are you crucifying people for, in your opinion, writing a bad record? And these would be going, I remember like it would, all the time you'd be like, oh, okay, and it was obviously at that time where access was still a thing and people would just come back and take it. And then obviously as pressures on time have come and all that, access has become harder and harder. And I think people look back and go, actually, we had all that time and we could have really interviewed, okay, we could dealt with the record not being very good, but we could have asked them all this other interesting stuff. And we just spent the entire time giving them a hard time because they'd made a bad record, like they committed some kind of crime and all that. And retrospectively, it's turned out everyone really loves that album or whatever. And that, I remember that happening along the rock press in particular. But I remember saying, so why does this happen? And I just don't know. It's just people have feel betrayed or something. But so yeah, you could have an agenda in that. But yeah, I think ultimately, yeah, you just want to go in and you're there to go, hey, let's have a good chat. It's one of the privileges of if you love music and you get to write music and meeting artists is a real privilege of that thing. Whether it's someone you've never heard of and they want to talk to you about their ideas and what they've done, or where it's someone you massively admire and you're like slightly nervous going into the interview. It's one of if you get to do it and you love music, it's amazing.
Yeah,
I really recommend it. Not many opportunities to do it these days, unfortunately.
yeah. I know what you mean about the power of like reviews and stuff. Though, like it's come up a few times on the podcast, but Matt Beaumont giving 10,000 Things 0, 1 out of 10, kind of
Oh yeah, yeah.
killing the career. It's just pretty wild, isn't it? But
Well, I interviewed Sam then for the Joy Division film.
yeah, yeah.
And there was a real thing where I literally had to go because it was for a news story in NME because obviously they were very keen that we do the cover of the film because Anton Corbin directed and he was an NME photographer, so it's very like we want this story in NME. And I remember having to be like and having a conversation with him out kind of like I just thought you were going to pan the film because it's me, and I'm like, and it shows you again about how the sort of power of NME and sort of innocuous thing. Like I don't think I'd even had read that review or was aware of it, and he was going, yeah, we got that really bad, or I remember it and had forgotten about it, or whatever. And it was kind of over him, it's like this life-defining thing. And even though he's become this massively successful actor, has done this amazing portrayal of Ian Curtis, he's like, I don't want you to slate the film just because you've got some grudge against me and 10,000 Things. And we're going, I forgot about 10,000 Things. It's like, were you in there, were you, mate? Oh, okay. And it's so it's in just show you. I think that's just show you that sort of bubble you get in as a writer and doing something like that, and you kind of think it's a bit of fun. They've released a record. You're entitled to say what you think of it. That's the whole point of it, and not realizing that there's this sort of snowball effect. Then 5 years later, the guy who thinking is scared to talk to you, even though he's the big fit star of the moment, because he's worried that you're just going to wreck his film because there's some weird vendetta against 10,000 Things, and there just wasn't. It was just Mark's opinion.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because when I posted the cool list from around the time that film came out, there was a little yeah, just a little aside in the cool list saying, um, maybe we got it wrong about Sam Riley, 10,000 Things reunion anyone type thing, and Sam read it on Instagram. He was like, oh, and I don't think he'd ever seen that before.
No, I
So
imagine he's not buying anything, to be fair to him.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's like maybe Enemy didn't hit us that much. I think he said, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So
do remember him going, yeah, I was just worried because it's me. And I was like, no, honestly, I mean, I don't think in fairness, I remember the singles, but I don't think I listened to the album. So it wasn't like there was some sort of like, right, let's get this guy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some good songs in it, I think.
Mhm.
Um, right, got some questions on Instagram.
Okay.
Um, you mentioned him earlier, I think, but got one saying, "Why on earth did you hire Matt Wilkinson?"
Is that from Matt Wilkinson?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm like his Brian Epstein, I discovered Matt Wilkinson. Basically, we needed a new. When I got promoted, we needed a new, and then Priya Alam had my job. We needed a new news reporter, and we just advertised for it. And there were two standout candidates. One was Calvin Harris, who basically was having
Right.
a pop at the NME and had applied, and I thought it was someone taking the piss, so I'd ignored it. And then he gave an interview to like something in Scotland, going, they didn't even bother to get back to me. So I had to email, go, I'm really sorry. I genuinely thought someone was taking the piss out of you. Oh, fair play. And I had very much the similar conversations to the one we've just had about it's not some big group think and we're anti you. It's like some people don't like your music, other people do. We're not. And he was, oh, fair. Thanks for explaining it to me. And then the other standout candidate was Matt Wilkinson, who basically had he was writing pieces. He was living in Cornwall. He was from Cornwall. He was living down there at the time. He'd written this piece, I think, for a magazine based in Devon, where he'd interviewed Amy Winehouse, and it was just a really brilliantly written piece. And he sort of put himself in it, but not too much. It was, really, really enjoyable piece to read. And I just wanted, and what we did this time, I just got people in to do the job to see if they were any good and whether they could hack it. And I just thought, I really want to meet this guy. He sounds really interesting. This piece is really good. I want to meet the person that wrote this. And so I sort of said to him, do you want to come up for a week's, uh, like it was like a shift on the Tuesday. It wasn't like work experience or anything. So he came up and worked, and I can't remember whose fault it was. Probably mine. But I remember when he got there, I was like, I've really cocked this up, but the deputy news editor's on holiday, so it's just two of us, and I shouldn't have got you in this week. I should have got a week when there's three of us, and so it's going to be tough. And I'm not going to be as polite. I'm going to be impolite. I'm literally just going to go, can you do this? Can you do this? Write this, do this. Honestly, whatever happens, I'll have you back for another week, but don't worry about it. But so if it feels like I'm not talking to you, don't worry. Because I was thinking, you've come all the way up to London and you're getting this news out. You should sort of going, I can't speak to you. So we had this conversation at the start of the week, and to be fair, he was brilliant in that week. And so I was like, you come back, and he came come back. And then I think for ages, I just had to keep paying him by the week because they wouldn't let me hire someone staff. And then, yeah, so purely merit. I didn't know him before. I'm glad to know him since. But yeah, purely on merit, whoever asked that. M. Wilkinson from
Dave Laser from Dustin's Bar Mitzvah, if you remember him. He's put what's the worst album you had to review, but I guess that wasn't really your field. You were saying, so is there like a worst interview? I guess or most difficult interview. I mean, you mentioned Marky Smith,
Marky
but
Smith, but yeah, I'm trying to worst record I've reviewed. Yeah, it's one of those things. Writing bad reviews is really easy and really fun, but it's not, it's like too easy and too much fun. So I try to avoid doing it. Um, I think the best record I gave. I mean, it's not a bad record, but just in terms of sort of getting it wrong, I remember giving King Adora a 4 out of 5 in Q really early on. It was probably a 3, and I felt like, oh my god, people are gonna absolutely kill me for this because there was a real thing about Q stars and all this sort of stuff, and that literally made no difference to anyone. But it wasn't a bad record, but it was probably a 3 rather than a 4. But they can have that star. That's from me to them.
and then Jamin Walker says, I'd like Paul to describe why he thinks collars out of long
Yeah.
sleeve jump. What?
This is
Like
my
it.
friend Ben. I used to work with Ben. Ben is like the biggest Kate Nash fan in the world. I worked with him at a social media agency about 5 or 6 years ago, and he was always asking me for stories of Kate Nash. And
All
that,
right.
so, but I think because the picture you posted, one of Guy Apple's pictures of me writing something back. I think was it down. I think we're in Staines actually at the
Okay, yeah.
at half fives thing. I often wore my collars turned up. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pictures from me in that era where I remember getting off a plane once and I had my like blazer. I turned the collar up and the guy behind me, old bloke, went, "You got your collar turned up?" And I was like, "Yeah, supposed to." And I was like, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I put them down again. But there was a real, yeah, it was a real era for turning your collar up. Don't know why. Doctor Who probably. I don't know.
And then, like, just one from my point of view, like, sometimes I'll come off a podcast, might be a day later or a couple of weeks later, I think, why on earth didn't I ask that?
Oh
Do you have
god, yeah.
moments like that?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Not only do you get that, you get the editing thing going. And I've done this to the other way to go, did you ask him about that? And you either forgot or you just couldn't because you didn't feel it was like, and you're like, oh. So yeah, yes, yeah, that many times. Spirit of the staircase, isn't it? You kind of go, oh, if I know, I'd ask them. The worst one I find is when you go, I used to find particularly because in the old days, before the glories of transcription things that are not amazing, but they're okay. The only way you get an interview out is you literally start at the beginning and listen to it all the way back, and then you'd hear the bits where somebody tells you something you've just missed it because you were thinking your next question. You'd be like, oh,
Mm.
should have responded to that. Or the flip side, the good side of it is there's a quote in there that you sort of missed in your head, and then you're like, "Oh my god, this is gold!" So you get it both ways. But yeah, I'll get many times, many times. I have probably every time. I imagine every time you speak to somebody, you probably just go, "Oh, I should have asked them about."
Yeah, it's true. And you're always going to think about
But as long as it's
what you
one,
did.
as long as you get that was always the worst. If you go, "But who's the producer?" you know, always remember to get the basics information, all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah.
particularly if it's a news story. I mean, that's the good thing I think doing the news desk for as long as I did is I kind of you got the news basics. So any interview I do, at least you're always like, "Oh, what's that? Where's that? How do they spell that?"
And then how are things panned out for you? Like, are you freelance now, yeah? Is that how
Yeah,
it works?
yeah. So yeah, I tend to do a lot of writing. So basically, when records come out, there's a sort of thing called a biog that often gets done, where a band will hire a writer to write. You interview them, and then you'll write about the record coming. And its initial reason for existing always used to be was what you'd send to journalists so they could prep for the interview because obviously it's a new record. There's nowhere, but increasingly they get used on like DSPs and they get sent to promoters and things like that. So I found myself doing a few of those, and they're great because if you forget to ask something, the band just put it in, so it's even better. Or if you go, if I know I'd ask, you can just go, oh, I forgot to ask because they're paying the label are paying you to do it. They'll go, oh, yeah, we'll ask them for you. So they're great. So I do a lot of those, which are quite good. I do a lot of going to school, dropping off, picking up from school, that kind of stuff. So that freelancing around that works. Just do stuff for Music Week as well, which is kind of funny. Doing the more industry side of things. Yeah, it's a bit of radio producing at Radio 6. I do occasionally, which is
Well, amazing.
I've learned what the buttons do because that was because that's the thing is it just has become. I mean, it's interesting because when I started 25 years ago, you could make a career out of pretty much freelancing for one title, which I did for Q for like 3 or 4 years. There was so much work, so much content, and it's interesting how over that time now the version of me now would be good at video, social, whether they get to write a long piece, I don't know. But it's really interesting. And it's a real. I think it's a. I would say this, but I do think it's a real loss because I just think so many narratives and so many sort of sense of occasion around records coming out has been lost. Because if I could eke out a career as a freelancer just working for one title, it just meant there was so much coverage of music in a really in-depth way even for the small stuff, got sort of that coverage. And I think now there is a bit of a thing where you don't have the weeklies and the monthlies, where sort of records just happen. And you're like, oh, I'm really looking for this record. Oh, it came out 2 weeks ago. Oh, it's like, and I just think there is some of it. Radio does a great job, particularly, in terms of getting people in and talking to people. But I think it's a real shame you don't have the sort of weekly and monthly news magazines and newspapers like you used to, just to give it that sense of here's a point that you can sort of work around as a listener and go, oh yeah, that's coming, that's happened. I really want to get into this. No matter how many times I pre-save the album, I'm like, oh God, I need to listen to that sort of thing. It's like sort of, so yeah, I think, yeah, it would be great. It's interesting how much there was to how sort of, as a freelancer, how hard it is now. So,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, mate. Well, always finish on two questions.
okay.
Um, has there been a high point? Was there a high point of those kind of noughties days, or your career so far, and anything you do differently?
Is that one? Was that the two questions or one question?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think do differently. I would looking back on it, and it's possible to do, but I think I would just like be like this. I loved it and I enjoyed it, but I think I would perhaps be a bit more like, this is so much more than I think it is, in terms of the music and everything that's happening. I think when you're in the middle of something, you're always in that fear that you've missed out on something. I think it would be, if I could go back and tell myself one thing to do different, it'd be just like, this is really exciting. People will be, listening to records that you're in the studio for doing the in the studio report. They'll be repressing this on vinyl. That's one thing. I think that era, despite the quality, the obvious quality that was there, got a bit of a bad rep just because it came in the shadow of the 90s. And I think I would probably say enjoy this era more, revel in it. High point, I mean, I guess going to New York with the Arctic Monkeys and being in the studio when they finished Humbug was quite exciting. Just, as a thing at the time. Again, at the time, it was like we managed to negotiate it. We've done a lot of work with them. They're like, okay, you can come and do this. And yeah, it was like, wow, okay. And then they're not realised, I don't think they've really done it since in terms of letting somebody in. And it was funny, I was helping them pack the studio up at the end of it. They were in Electric Lady, on New York, where the AC/DC recording and all this sort of stuff. And so they had to get out quick. And they were like, oh, can you help us? So I was like putting guitars in cases and pedals and stuff. And you kind of like, and then 6 months later, it's out as a record. And I think at the time, you're like, oh, wow, this is, it's not history, but this is a significant moment. You're there. Whereas I'm sure for them it was like, yeah, that was handy. He was there to help back up. But it's like, for me it was a high.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've got to ask you, like, about new music. Are you as excited now about new bands as you were back in the day? Do you think it's as healthy?
I think it's harder. I think it's in terms of inventiveness, quality. Yeah, that is what exciting eras of music don't. I don't think there's an era of music where you just go, actually, it was absolutely terrible and it was devoid of talent. I think it is exciting now. You can find the right bands, you can listen to stuff. It is exciting. It's just a lot harder because I just think, whereas there used to be the phenomenon of the great debut, definitely, maybe, never mind the bollocks, whatever people say I am, these records that would come out and launch careers. I don't think any band in particular, but any artist generally, is going to really be launched until they're 3 albums in. You look at Fontaines DC, I think absolutely amazing group. It took them to the fourth, third record breaks, and fourth record, now they're sort of doing, they're really now moving into that higher level. Amel and the Sniffers, 3 albums in, they're suddenly like, people are going, oh, they're amazing on a scale. So I think it's so much harder. You really have to hang in there. You really have to sort of keep banging and pushing as an artist to break through, because I just think there's not as immediate ways to people's attention, and there's so much demands for it, and there's so many different ways to connect. So I think, yeah, that it's harder, but I think, look at those groups, look at the music that's being made now. It's really exciting. Music's really good, and I think music has to be really good now, because when you release an album now or a record, you're literally competing against all music ever released ever. So if that doesn't encourage you to up your game, nothing else will. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great stuff out there and to be heard and enjoyed and found. But yeah, I think I was lucky growing up as a teenager. There was music papers that did a lot of that hard work for me, whereas now we're sort of relying on people to do the work themselves. So or go on TikTok. I don't know, but
Yeah, like algorithms,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
yeah, I mean, I do find it really strange that a lot, particularly on the business side of stuff, a lot of people go on about how important TikTok is a tool for breaking music, and how the music industry don't control that. At least in previous times, they could do advertising, they could, billboards, get, people tour support, whatever. And now there's a lot of reliance, it seems, particularly in pop music, of TikTok, and they don't, and it's like flipping a coin a lot of the time. Yes, quality and people who understand it can work it properly, but having that moment where everyone's doing a dance to your song is a real moment. Can be a real moment of chance. I mean, that seems to me like we need to evolve something else as well as the meme dances and all that sort of stuff. That's great, but can we have something else perhaps come in and support artists and help break new talent in addition to what's it, creative videos or remixing or whatever it's called on TikTok?
Yeah. I know what you mean. There needs to be like some kind of filter. The filter, I don't know.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, I'm not. But equally, I'm not saying return to the great gatekeepers and that only NME should be allowed to decide what new music comes through, which I think was perhaps one of the perceptions of the music press in the past. But I think it also did a really important job of focusing attention on the great talents and as an artist, you've just got to work so hard. I mean, literally, your job now is not just making music and being brilliant at that. It's can you do social media? Can you
yeah,
do this? Can you?
must be so annoying.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of pressure, a lot of work.
yeah. And then put you on the spot a bit. You mentioned the radio, but if you were curating a naughty's playlist or DJing a naughty's indie night, what song would you finish on?
Well, one popped into my head immediately, but that's kind of, which would be the Rat. But that's an obvious one, isn't it? So by the
Yeah,
wall,
but if that's the one, that's the one.
that popped in. I'm trying to think. There was a song, actually, you know what? There's a song, just to be, if I could, so the Rat's probably my real answer, but just my snobbish answer would be, do you remember there was a band called Super System and they had a song called Born Into the World and it came out just in the aftermath of the DFA LCD sort of thing. And it was amazing. I remember this thing, I've been at NME and it came out and it was like, Born Into the World. It was all about being born behind us. I remember that coming out, I was going, this is absolutely amazing. Cannot wait for the album. And then the single, we just didn't come, the album, and we got played at the NME office loads. And then yeah, 6, 7 weeks, months passed, and then the album came, and everyone had sort of moved on. But yeah, so maybe my surprise close would be Super System, Born Into This World. I think that's what they're called.
Well, okay, it's not heard that, I don't think, but
It's one of those songs where I imagine if you went to an indie disco in that era, you probably go, oh yeah, that one, oh yeah.
right, I'll go listen to it after this. But yeah, it'd be good to get on the radio show, mate, if you fancy it. Pick some
Yeah.
like 10 favorite songs of that era.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let me know. Let me know what you want. Yeah, definitely.
Nice one, mate. All right, well, cheers for your time. That's I really enjoyed that, Paul. So.
Okay, well, I hope it was good and of use to you.
No,
Give me a
definitely.
shout
Yeah,
if there's anything you need to change.
yeah. If I have one of those moments, where
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
that.
Yeah, even if it's just for your own interest, feel free.
Yeah.
A number of times I've done that. Oh yeah. And normally it's Ned just going, did you ask that?
But yeah, I'll probably post that beginning of July. Fucking, it's July now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, post that beginning of July, I reckon. So, but I'll
Cool.
keep you posted.
Yeah, let me know. I mean, not that my social media reach is insanely small, but I will do what I can.
No, yeah, yes. All right, mate. Well,
That's
take
cool.
care. Good luck for
You
next
too.
season.
Yeah. Are you going to any more of the Kaisers and shows, or are you just that one up?
Just just that one because it was like with the cribs and we.
Because I might
like,
go to the London version of that if you go.
sorry, I see what you mean. I think might do. I'm going to try and go to see Block Party in Nottingham. I think they're playing. Is it Splendor or something?
Yes. Yeah.
But like I said, I've got a lad as well, so it's whether what I can go to and what I can't go to. But
Cool too.
hopefully do a
Nice
few
one.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I hope you see it, one of them.
Yeah, try and grab you through a Vox pop.
Yeah.
Cheers, mate.
Nice one. Take care.